Imagine working 7 days a week on a large-scale construction site. You, along with thousands of others, carry millions of stone blocks and put them on top of each other according to a complex system. You work without modern construction equipment. You have no air conditioning or constant access to water. It's so hot outside that you can fry eggs on the road. You've been building the pyramid for decades, and now, when it's finally done, you enjoy the result of the colossal work of thousands of people. You're looking at a giant cultural monument of global value that will freeze in time and amaze people for tens of thousands of years. A few thousand years have passed. People in the 21st century see the pyramids and are like, "Wow, I can't believe humans have built this." Yeah, the people who built the pyramids wouldn't have appreciated such a theory. But actually, there are reasons to believe that people built it using some fantastic technology. From the outside, it seems the Great Pyramids are just big triangles of stone. People just put some heavy blocks on top of each other, and that's it. In fact, the design seems too perfect to be true. The pyramid consists of more than 2 million blocks. They lay so close to each other and are so even that you couldn't squeeze even a thin sheet of paper between them. Scientists still can't figure out the exact technology for building the Egyptian pyramids. One of the biggest and most famous is the Great Pyramid of Giza. This huge construction, well known all over the world, has one big secret. There should be a capstone on top of the pyramid. It's a triangular-shaped stone block, a small pyramid on top of a huge one. It's also called a pyramidion. The builders of ancient Egypt made it out of granite and limestone and covered it with gold. No records or old drawings prove that there was a pyramidion at the top of the Great Pyramid of Giza. But there's another ancient Egyptian structure with such a triangle, the Red Pyramid. It was built before the Great One, and its capstone has survived to this day. Archaeologists have found and reconstructed it. But where could the capstone of the Great Pyramid be? It's a mystery that still has no answer. Some are sure that some thieves have stolen it from the top. Maybe they just climbed up and pushed the pyramidion down. It makes perfect sense. The capstone was probably the most valuable element of the pyramid. Many scientists and archaeologists still don't know its exact purpose. Some believe that this peak covered with gold glorified the pharaohs. The capstone reflected moonlight at night and illuminated the entire space around it. During the day, the capstone reflected sunlight with its shiny surface. You could have noticed it from afar. The top of the pyramid was a kind of guiding star for lost travelers. All other stone blocks of the pyramid consist of limestone. People polished them to make them look shiny. In the past, they were even glowing and reflected light. You could see glowing pyramids from space, although they looked like tiny lights. Over thousands of years, winds, sandstorms, and rains have changed the pyramid's appearance. If people had taken care of them all this time, they would have looked like something out of science fiction movies, or the pyramids from Las Vegas. But unfortunately, we will never see their original appearance. Some archaeologists and scientists believe that the capstone could absorb the sun's energy and distribute it evenly throughout the pyramid. No one knows precisely why the Egyptians needed this technology. There's a theory the pyramids are ancient energy systems. The pharaohs applied this energy to use some unique technologies that were more advanced than all the achievements of the 21st century. And the triangular shape of the pyramids was ideal for boosting this electromagnetic energy. In theory, solar radiation, or electromagnetic forces, accumulated at the top of the pyramid, filled the inner rooms, and then went down the walls to the base. Any surface distortion could prevent the flow from spreading, so they had to create a perfectly smooth surface. That's why they installed the blocks so that nobody could squeeze a needle or razor blade between them. Many people believe in this theory because they built the pyramids from limestone. This material can hold energy inside itself. In the inner part, they created granite deposits to cause air ionization, that is, to create an electric charge. They also dug channels under the pyramid for water to transmit electricity. And at the top, they put a gold capstone, the best conductor of electricity. So, this is how you get a great power generator. Different cultures used similar technologies to create electricity all over the world. But these are all theories. If it had been working, humanity would have used these technologies today. There are mentions of the metal industry, chemistry, engineering, physics, mathematics, and astronomy in some ancient records. Most scientists don't believe in all these things. We know the detailed stages of the technology's development in different cultures. In the 21st century, scientists, historians, and anthropologists can track the evolution of all modern devices. If people had created some technological inventions in ancient times, the history of the world would have looked different. Perhaps all the achievements of antiquity could have been wiped off the face of the earth by global cataclysms. And it can happen to us. Just imagine how people would dig up a laptop in 5,000 years. Perhaps they wouldn't understand what kind of device it is. Another Egyptian wonder surrounded by mystery is the statue of the Sphinx. The Egyptians carved it out of a single massive piece of limestone about 4.5 thousand years ago. But scientists still don't know the exact date of its construction or who built it. People painted the Sphinx in different colors, so it looked much brighter and more vivid in the distant past. It was shining just like the Great Pyramids. Anyway, time hasn't only changed its appearance, but its name too. Initially, the Egyptians called it Hor-Mekhet. The Greeks renamed it the Sphinx about a few hundred years after it had been built. The Sphinx emphasized the greatness of the rulers of Egypt. It also performed a symbolic function of a watchdog guarding the tomb of the pharaoh and the paths leading to it. This version sounds realistic, since archaeologists have discovered many secret entrances at the foot of the Sphinx. Perhaps these rooms and intricate tunnels lead to underground halls with treasures. And treasures don't always mean gold and jewelry. According to legends and theories, the Sphinx guards the Hall of Records, the storage of all humankind's knowledge. The information about the ancient mythical state of Atlantis could be there. You can find many detailed maps of the internal dungeons of the Sphinx on the internet. They show structures 12 stories deep under the statue. It looks like a small city filled with gold, scrolls of knowledge, and various ancient artifacts. But don't believe all these maps. These are just theories. Several thousand years have passed, but people have very little information about it. Archaeologists know that there are still many strange and exciting things about the Sphinx that are still undiscovered. Some locals are afraid to research because they believe they can awaken something terrible from the underground depths. Therefore, it's mostly scientists from other countries who conduct the excavations. In 1998, scientists discovered strange tunnels leading to empty rooms under the Sphinx. They realized that some people tried to get there through tunnels in the past, and maybe those people took all the treasures that were there. One of the legends says that some powerful artifact lays beneath the Sphinx. Its technology can change the whole world, but the locals are hiding it because it can damage the planet. Some believe that you can find evidence of unknown technologies painted on the granite walls in the pharaoh's tombs. But most likely, these paintings and signs tell us the myths and legends of ancient Egypt. But what if Egyptian symbols and drawings are detailed instructions for using ancient technologies? What if the locals that lived at that time thought, people in the future won't be able to get energy themselves. Let's leave some detailed instructions for them. Anyway, there are many riddles and theories. In reality, the search for answers is a dangerous undertaking, since it's not easy to get into the underground halls. Excavations can ruin the structure of the entire Sphinx. Any person inside the tunnels may get lost and never be able to find their way back. Besides, it costs a lot of money. Now, what would be awesome is if people could invent some device that could scan underground areas and show their detailed models.
The majority of us have believed for a really long time that Stonehenge, one of the most iconic monuments in the world, was an ancient calendar because of its alignment with the summer and winter solstices. But no one could figure out how it really worked. Now, a team of researchers have come out with another study. It turns out that Stonehenge could have functioned like the solar calendar. It's a similar principle to the solar calendar ancient Egyptians used to have, the one based on a year composed of 365.25 days. Each of the stones from this big mysterious Sarsen circle represented one day within a month. Sarsens are what we call these large boulders. It's actually a perpetual calendar, where people could track every winter solstice sunset. That way, those who lived near Stonehenge, which is today Wiltshire, UK, could keep track of the days and months of the year. We all now understand this mysterious calendar system because of this interesting discovery in 2020. The team has identified the source of 50 of the 52 Sarsens that make up the iconic stone circle we all know about. They analyzed the chemical composition of these Sarsens and traced their origins to the West Woods in Wiltshire, which is about 15 miles away from the monument. Not only did these 50 Sarsens come from the same source, but they were also placed in their current position at approximately the same time. They make the outer circle of Stonehenge, together with a horseshoe-shaped inner ring. Near the center of the monument, there are smaller rocks, known as bluestones. The team traced the origins of the bluestones all the way to Wales. They also discovered that the Sarsens share a common chemistry, over 99% silica with trace elements. Two Sarsens were different from each other and also different from the main cluster. These Sarsens were arranged in 3 different formations at Stonehenge. 30 of them formed this huge stone circle that dominates the monument. 4 station stones ended up in a rectangular formation outside the circle, while the rest, located inside the stone circle, were constructed into 5 trilithons. A trilithon is when you have 2 vertical stones with a horizontal lintel at the top. 30, 5, and 4 are pretty interesting numbers in the context of this calendar system. The 30 uprights that are spread around the main Sarsen ring could represent days of the month. If you multiply that by 12, you get 360. Add on 5 more, those from the central trilithons, and the result is 365. And to really adjust the calendar to match a solar year, you need to add 1 extra leap day for every 4 years, right? The team believes the ancient people used the 4 station stones to keep track of this part. So, in this system, they paired the summer and winter solstice every year with the same pair of stones. Ancient people started building Stonehenge about 5,000 years ago, and it took more than 1,000 years to finish the work. But the Stonehenge you see today is not the complete, original version from the beginning. People have broken and taken away many of its old bluestones and Sarsens. The entire structure also changed over time since there were generations and generations, 180 of them to be precise, that passed since the beginning of Stonehenge, who would participate in the building and rebuilding of it. People created Stonehenge in 4 stages. They first built a circular enclosure that stretched over 330 feet, 100 meters, in diameter and went around 56 pits. A high bank flanks the ditch of the enclosure, while there's a low bank on the outside. Some theories even say that this part was some form of a communal cemetery. Later, in the second stage, builders added a horseshoe of Sarsen trilithons. In the third stage, they constructed a ceremonial avenue that was nearly 2 miles long. It possibly traced the path of the bluestones. People moved from the Aubrey holes to the Q&R holes, a double arc that these bluestones have been arranged into. At this stage, builders also reorganized the entrance stones and recut the main enclosure ditch. During the 4th stage, the stones were broken and builders etched carvings into the Sarsens. Later, the bluestones ended up being modified again. Builders didn't leave any written records about how they managed to drag these heavy stones to the site and get them to stand so perfectly upright. But there are theories that say their techniques were more closely associated with woodwork than masonry. They made mortise holes and protruding tenons because they wanted to slot these stones together, and they used tongue and groove joints to do that. When they dug the hole for the stones, they placed timber poles at the back of the holes that were used as brace support. Then they moved the stone into a position and hauled it upward with ropes. They packed rubble into the hole to make sure the stone stayed in place. A pre-industrial farming society put this fascinating monument together using only tools made of stone and bone. Not even the wheel had been invented yet. This unusual formation is also known as ringing rocks. The stones you can see at Stonehenge have some pretty odd acoustic properties. When you strike them, they produce a loud clanging sound. That could be one of the reasons why people bothered to transport them over such a long distance in the first place. In some ancient cultures, people believed that these rocks contained healing powers. It's a really popular location that attracts over 1 million visitors a year. When it first opened to the public, visitors were allowed to walk among the stones. They could even climb on them, as there weren't any restrictions. Until the 19th century, visitors would regularly chip off pieces of the rock to take them home as souvenirs. They would also engrave their initials into the stones. They camped within the circle and dug fire pits, not realizing that the digging pits could seriously undermine the stability of the entire monument. Over time, visitors have encountered more and more restrictions until the monument was finally roped off in 1997 because of the serious erosion of the stones. That means if you want to visit, you can only view it from a distance unless you want to pay extra for the stone circle experience, which can be arranged outside of normal visiting hours. Stonehenge originally had 2 entrances that led into the enclosure. There was a wide one to the northeast and one that was a bit smaller and located on the southern side. If you look at it today, you can see there are many more gaps. This is mostly because of tracks made later that once crossed the monument. The ground within Stonehenge has been severely disturbed, and it wasn't just about random visitors digging fire pits. There was a group of people who dug a large deep hole within the stone circle in the 17th century because they were looking for treasure. Then there was Charles Darwin, who also did some digging because he was studying earthworms in the area. He wanted to know how these worms could impact objects in the soil over time. He observed how a fallen stone there had sunk deeper into the ground and realized it was happening because of the activities of these tiny creatures who churned through the soil all the time. In 1963, there was a theory that Stonehenge had been built as some sort of computer that predicts solar and lunar eclipses. Later, some proposed it was actually constructed as a monument to ancestors that had passed away. This theory says the permanence of its stones represented the eternal afterlife. The average sarsen you can find there weighs 25 tons, while the biggest one weighs around 30 tons. If you want to get an idea of how massive these stones really are, you can go behind the visitor center in the outdoor gallery to check out a replica sarsen stone. It's a true copy of a freestanding upright from one of the trilithons that are located in the inner horseshoe of the monument. There are 5 Neolithic houses at Stonehenge based on real archaeological evidence of houses found in that area. Each of them had stake-built walls and a chalk floor. Some even had furniture. There was also a lot of trash discovered, which means people in this area used to like celebrations and feasting. Research has shown that people lived in these houses for 50 to 100 years, around 4,500 years BCE, which was the time when the builders brought the sarsen stones to Stonehenge. During the time they were building Stonehenge, generations of people went through major changes themselves, from the Stone Age to the early Bronze Age. They were no longer as static and isolated. They started to travel and trade more, which means they communicated way more than their ancestors, even internationally. This is how they could have spread the word about Stonehenge, and it's also when the whole mystery and fascination with the monument began. Over the years, archaeologists have uncovered all kinds of stuff on rune stones, curses, poems, protective magic spells, and even inheritance disputes. However, a newly uncovered ancient Norse artifact known as Svingerud stone has just one word on it: Sounds boring, right? Well, think again, because this might just be the oldest runestone ever discovered, almost 2,000 years old. But that's not all. Excavations are still ongoing, and depending on what follows next, it could unravel secrets and the true meaning behind the mysterious magical runes. So let's explore and see just how much known history you can rewrite with only one engraved word on a stone. A long time ago, during the first few centuries of the Common Era, Scandinavians and Romans crossed paths. They traded goodies like glass and silver, and eventually, Roman customs and even written culture ended up north. The Nords liked the Roman alphabet but wanted their own letters copyrighted, so they decided to create their own unique characters, which they called runes. Almost 20 centuries later, in 2021, archaeologists were excavating an Iron Age burial site near the village of Svingerud in eastern Norway. Among the cremation graves, they uncovered a reddish sandstone slab that would become a centerpiece in a major Norwegian archaeological discovery. It's the size of a coffee table, measuring just over 12 inches across. The stone was found buried with burned bones and charcoal, part of an early cremation grave. The stone had runes engraved into it, looking rough and shallow, like they were scratched with the tip of a knife or something needle-like. Runestones are not unusual. Archaeologists are used to uncovering runic inscriptions, especially in this region. However, tests show that both the burial site and the carving on the stone likely date back to somewhere between the 1st and 3rd centuries. That places it deep in pre-Viking history, centuries before the Viking Age officially began around 800 CE. That makes it one of the oldest reliably dated examples of early writing in Scandinavia. When you look at these carvings, they either look like magical symbols made to call on Nordic deities to help you, or like random scratches made by an angry man hitting a stone with something sharp. But these are real letters, crude but intentional. It's an ancient writing system used by Germanic tribes across Northern Europe. They were engraved into wood, bone, or stone. Their shapes are straight, angular lines because curves were tough to carve with the tools they had back then. When they met with the Roman Empire, rather than just borrowing Latin letters, the Germanic tribes took the idea of writing and carved out their own version. The original alphabet was called Elder Futhark. It had 24 letters. We can find them on artifacts dating from around the 2nd to the 8th century CE. Its name comes from its first 6 letters: F, U, Th, A, R, and K. Each rune probably had a name that matched the sound it made. For example, the rune that sounds like A was called Anzus. However, nobody from back then left us a memo explaining the names. In fact, the knowledge of how to read them was forgotten until 1865, when Norwegian linguist Sophus Bugge deciphered them by comparing clues. He examined later rune alphabets and ancient poems that referenced the runes, like a detective sketching a suspect from scattered witness clues. For many runes, especially the oldest ones in the Elder Futhark, the meaning is still open to interpretation. They weren't common knowledge, which is reflected by the fact that only some 350 surviving inscriptions remain. This changed eventually when the Scandinavian language evolved from Proto-Norse into Old Norse, spoken by mighty Vikings. The Elder Futhark was reduced from 24 to 16 runes to reflect the changes in the language, thus becoming the Younger Futhark, which was far better spread. Runes weren't really used to write books or keep daily records. Instead, you'd find them carved on gravestones, weapons, and various tools. It's believed that people used runes to show ownership, honor loved ones who had passed away, leave short messages, or sometimes for protection or magic. In the early days, some runes probably had special spiritual or ritual meanings too. One interesting fact about runestones specifically is that they were often used for self-promotion or boasting, like an ancient social media status or a tweet posted on a wall, or better said, a stone. One such example of a runestone from the 11th century where a man named Vigmund had it carved for himself, calling himself the cleverest of men. He even added that he was a ship captain. And yes, he made sure everyone knew that while he was alive. In the Old Norse poem Havamal, Odin says he hung on the world tree for 9 nights, pierced by a spear, to gain knowledge of the runes. This goes to show just how powerful and mystical those symbols were perceived to be. It's fitting that the word rune comes from a Proto-Germanic word which can be translated as secret or whisper. There's a common saying about power being in words, and for the old Germanic tribes, that power felt like actual magic. It's also why it's important to know when this magic came to be. And the Svingerud runestone tells us that. But it's not just when it was written, it's also what's written on it, where and why. The location where the Svingerud stone was discovered is already a significant archaeological site. It's famous for its incredible discoveries, including the remarkable Jormunbu helmet, the only Viking helmet ever found in Norway. The stone was placed in a cremation pit, alongside the remains of an adult and a few personal items. Thanks to charcoal and bone samples, researchers can figure out how old the runestone is by using a method called radiocarbon dating. The Svingerud stone isn't the first ancient Norse artifact with runes that archaeologists have discovered, not even close. People carved runes into all sorts of everyday objects like combs, jewelry, and knives long ago. Some of those might even be just as old. Other finds have runes, but they're often broken, loose, or don't have clear dating. However, with radiocarbon dating, scientists have confirmed that the Svingerud stone is really the oldest runestone ever found. The writing on it suggests that it was part of a ritual and might have even been a message to the deceased. The inscription isn't long. It's just one word, Idiburg. No one knows exactly what it means. The clearest part says Idibera, and most researchers agree it's probably a name. Maybe Idibera in a genitive form, meaning of Idibera or belonging to Idibera. So this could be the name of the person buried there or someone being honored. There's a decent chance it's a female name, possibly making this the earliest known female rune inscriber in history. But researchers now believe that the Svingerud runestone is a part of a bigger monument. They found more than a dozen sandstone pieces scattered across several graves at the site, and when they assembled them in the lab, they fit together like a puzzle. This suggests they all came from one single upright stone. The main piece with the inscription was found in one grave, but other similar pieces were buried in nearby cremation pits. Archaeologists think it was broken and reused in a ritual, maybe to connect different people or generations who had been buried there. Instead of just marking one grave, it might have first been a memorial and was later put back into the other graves as a symbolic act. Some even speculate that the runes might have been carved by different hands throughout various time periods. The Svingerud stone might be small, but as the oldest runestone ever found with a secure archaeological context, it could be the key to how writing first took root in Northern Europe. This Norwegian archaeological discovery proves that runes were already tied to ritual, memory, and maybe even women. And if it's just a fragment of a larger monument, we've only seen part of the picture. Ancient Norse artifacts like this reshape what we know about pre-Viking history. And with luck, more runestones will follow, maybe even from another female rune inscriber.
It turns out the Great Pyramid of Giza might be way older than we think, like over 20,000 years old. That's older than farming or written language. But then, who built such astonishing monuments? Were those even human? Italian researcher Alberto Donini based his idea on something called the relative erosion method. In short, you look at how stone wears down over time and say, yeah, this kind of damage would take way longer than a few thousand years. But before we dive deeper, here's a quick refresher on the pyramids themselves. The pyramids of Giza are some of the oldest giant stone structures ever made by humans. 2 of them are still the tallest pyramids ever built in the ancient world, and the Great Pyramid of Khufu is the tallest of the 3. There's one more reason why that Great Pyramid is special. It's the only one of the original 7 wonders of the ancient world that's still standing today. Now, these pyramids weren't built in one sudden aha moment. A lot of people over many generations worked on them, and you can see their progress over time. Early pyramids have mistakes, weird angles, and structural issues. As for the later ones, they get cleaner and more efficient. It looks like the builders were slowly figuring things out. Each generation solved new engineering problems and got better at it. It's like updates to a smartphone. Each new version is smoother and more advanced. This brings us to the big questions. How old are the pyramids? And who built them? Oh, and how on earth did people move and stack stones that weigh as much as trucks without modern machines? Well, so far we have pretty solid evidence for the general timeline and the workers involved in the process. But the exact construction methods are still debated. And that's why claims like this 20,000-year-old pyramid idea get so popular. Most historians stick with the traditional dating, around 4,500 years old. Now, let's get back to the relative erosion method. Wind, rain, heat, cold, they all slowly eat away at rock. And the longer a stone sits outside, the more damage it collects. Like how an old sidewalk looks way rougher than a brand new one. And the Great Pyramid wasn't always rough and blocky. It used to be wrapped in smooth white limestone. But after a big earthquake in the year 1303, Egyptians pulled off the outer stones and used them to rebuild Cairo. That's why parts of the pyramid have only been exposed to the weather for about 675 years. At the base of the pyramid, there's a limestone pavement. Some of it was hidden under those casing stones for thousands of years and only got exposed after they were removed. Right next to it, there's pavement made of the same stone, but it has been exposed since the day the pyramid was built. These different amounts of time in the open turn the pyramid into a natural stopwatch. Basically, Donini looked at two parts of the same stone, asking a simple question. If this much damage happened in 675 years, how long would it take to make that much damage? To get the answer, he didn't examine just one spot. He checked 12 different places around the pyramid, because stone doesn't wear down evenly everywhere. Some areas get more wind, others are exposed to more sun, and some may have tiny cracks that speed things up. Because of that, the numbers he got were very different. Some spots made the pyramid seem pretty young. Other spots made it seem crazy old. So instead of picking one number, he averaged them all together. And when he did that, the average came out to around 25,000 years old. If that estimate is even a bit close, it would mean the pyramid was built way earlier than we think, somewhere around 2300 BCE. Now, Donini doesn't claim this is an exact date. According to his analysis, there's a strong chance that the pyramid is much older than traditionally believed, but it's not a guarantee. So, it's no wonder that a lot of experts strongly disagree with this theory, which makes it controversial. Now, that's a great thing about science. It's based on facts, not whatever is popular at the time. But let's sneak a peek inside these mysterious ancient pyramids. The Great Pyramid is the oldest of the three famous pyramids of Giza, and it's also the biggest. It was built as a tomb for Pharaoh Khufu, who ruled during Egypt's 4th dynasty. If you've ever heard the name Cheops, that's just the Greek version of Khufu's name. Basically, same guy, like Robert versus Bob. Right next to the Great Pyramid, there are two more large pyramids. Those weren't some random projects, they were built for Khufu's family. All three were constructed during Egypt's Old Kingdom, spread out over 3 generations of rulers. We really can't pin down the exact dates because we don't have enough evidence. Historians have to piece the whole story together with the help of ancient records, inscriptions, and radiocarbon dating, like assembling a timeline from half-burned notes and faded receipts. One big mystery is whether each pharaoh lived long enough to see their pyramid finished. These projects were massive and took years, even decades. It's very possible that some pyramids were completed by the next ruler after the original pharaoh passed away. The Great Pyramid itself was likely built around 100 years after an earlier one, which was a step pyramid. It was kind of a prototype that helped Egyptian builders figure out how to go from stacked steps to smooth-sided giants. But how did they actually pull this off? Because stacking millions of giant rocks into a perfectly shaped pyramid is not something you do when you're bored. First thing we should consider, nobody had really done this before. The older pyramid was more like a giant stone staircase, so cool, but very different. The pyramids at Giza were a whole new level. That's like going from building a shed to suddenly constructing a skyscraper and somehow not messing it up. For one thing, ancient Egypt had it pretty good back then. Every year the Nile flooded, and when the water went away, it left behind super fertile soil. In other words, they had tons of food, more than enough to keep people alive and feed a massive workforce. That extra food powered the pyramid project. The rulers figured out how to organize farming really well. They took that extra food and used it to support thousands of workers. Now, speaking of workers, some people likely worked on the pyramids full-time. Others were farmers who helped out when they weren't busy in the fields. Some people probably paid their taxes by doing labor. Plus, researchers found notes that showed a lot of day-to-day planning. During the wet season, Egyptians used shallow boats to float heavy stones closer to the site instead of dragging everything across land. So, the river was handling a lot of the heavy lifting. The real headache was getting those massive stones up. You just can't lift a multi-ton rock over your head and hope for the best. The defeat would be crushing. The builders had to use ramps. But if you build one long straight ramp from the ground all the way to the top of the pyramid, that ramp would be so huge it'd be like another pyramid. Like, congrats, you built the wrong pyramid first. So because of that, people came up with other ideas. Maybe the ramp wrapped around the outside, spiraling up like a parking garage. Or maybe the ramp was hidden inside the pyramid, which sounds cool and mysterious, but there's not great proof for it yet. What helped a lot was a discovery of an old stone quarry called Hatnub from the same time period. Archaeologists found a super steep ramp system that everyone used to think was impossible. It had holes for wooden posts on the sides, and workers probably used ropes and sleds to drag huge stone blocks uphill. Just imagine a group of people hauling a sled while looping ropes around posts for extra leverage. It's like ancient gym bros doing leg day non-stop. If the pyramid builders used something like that, it means the ramps didn't need to be massive. They could be way shorter and steeper. In any case, the mystery of the pyramids is far from solved. Maybe one day, someone will discover the rest of the tale.
Off the coast of Croatia, archaeologists have recently uncovered something incredible. A perfectly built stone road, still intact, buried under layers and layers of mud. It's almost 7,000 years old. Who built it? Why? And where does it lead? This road might have been lost forever, if not for sheer luck. Back in 2021, archaeologists were looking at satellite images of the island of Korčula, a little Croatian island in the Adriatic Sea. Suddenly, they noticed some strange shapes, odd patterns, half seen beneath the waters. Curious, they dove into the waters to check it out. That's when they uncovered something incredible, a sunken Neolithic settlement, the village of Solin. But the ancient village was just the beginning. In 2023, while exploring the site further, archaeologists found something even more breathtaking. A perfectly built stone road, still intact, buried under layers of sea mud. It was thousands of years old. The road is only 13 feet wide. It's laid carefully, stone by stone, a ghost of a forgotten world stretching across the seabed. This was no accident of nature. The stones were too precisely shaped, too deliberately placed. And somehow, across 7,000 years of storms and tides, both the village and the road survived. One of the scientists said it's a miracle. The islands around Korčula shielded the coast from massive waves. This spared them both from destruction. They also found something else. Ceramic fragments and flint knives, small whispers of the people who lived here in the past. But who were they? The mysterious road goes way back into the Stone Age. An ancient culture called Hvar culture lived on the Hvar Island nearby. But they also spread across the eastern Adriatic coast and built the village of Solin just offshore from the coast of Korčula Island. The road connected the village to the main island. If you set foot on Hvar Island today, you'd see a fascinating island of pine forests, lavender fields, and sunlight that spills across vineyards. But you'd also be stepping into a living mosaic woven from 7,000 years of history. Neolithic people lived there around 4,900 BCE. That was before the rise of cities, before the pyramids of Egypt, before history even had their first kings. These people found shelter in the island's caves. In local places like Grabcheva Cave and Markova Cave, they crafted delicate, painted pottery, some of the oldest in Europe. This ancient settlement once bustled with life, perched near beaches where now only waves roll. The people who built it walked barefoot over its stones, carrying baskets of grain, tools, and clay pots filled with water or olive oil. Among those little shards, archaeologists discovered something amazing: the oldest depiction of a boat in all of Europe. Even in 3,500 BCE, the people of Havar were dreaming of journeys beyond the horizon. And even though the Neolithic farmers of Havar culture didn't have great technology, they had already learned to tame the earth. They built megalithic stone tombs, raised circles of rock in nearby Gradina Bay, and crafted intricate flint blades and stone axes. Why are Solin village and the road underwater now? We don't know for sure. Perhaps something happened to them in the past that caused this. In any case, the road and Solin are all we have remained from those days. Havar Island was always a fascinating place to live in. The island's history is rough and beautiful, carved by rebellions, pirates, and foreign kings. Around 385 BCE, the Greeks sailed across the sea and found this beautiful island, a high limestone ridge, hidden freshwater springs, and fertile plains kissed by the sea breeze. No wonder they decided to settle here. These Greeks themselves came from Paros, a sunny island in the Aegean Sea. When they got to Havar Island, they found a town they called Pharos. They weren't being super original. Now we know this town as Stari Grad, which means Old Town, and it actually is one of the oldest towns in all of Europe. They brought with themselves deep knowledge of farming, sailing, and city building. This helped them to do something extraordinary. They divided the land into perfect geometric squares, neat fields for vineyards, olives, and grains. This perfect patchwork of farms is now called the Stari Grad Plain, and it's still so pure and unchanged after more than 2,000 years that it became a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Later came the Romans. Their villas and roads now also threaded across the hillsides. Then came the Croats. Their traditions, from religious processions to the haunting ancient songs of Holy Week, have survived the passing of centuries. But it was under the Venetians, which was about the 15th century, that Havar truly blossomed. When the Venetians came there, they chose Havar town as a major port. They built fortresses and arsenals, cathedrals, theaters, and squares. It was the golden age of Renaissance, and Havar brought three genius giants of Croatian culture to the world. The first one was Petar Hektorovic. He captured the life of fishermen and the spirit of the sea in his epic Fishing and Fisherman's Talk. In a local castle, the Tverdalj Castle, his stone villa still guards its secret fish pond. The second one was Hannibal Lukic, who wrote The Slave Girl, the first secular drama in Croatian culture. And finally, Martin Benetovic, a painter, musician, and playwright who left his mark on the island's soul. In the Franciscan monastery by the sea, there's a beautiful painting stretching across an entire wall, The Last Supper. Not the original by Da Vinci. This one is thought to be created by Matteo Ingoli. Same theme, but a different artist, though this work is considered a Renaissance masterpiece. Back then, Havar Island became a jewel of the Venetian Empire, a naval stronghold, and later, a stage for Renaissance poets. But this place wasn't always peaceful. In the 16th century, the Ottoman Empire came here. Their corsair raiders swept across the sea and wanted to conquer the island. Havar's people built fortresses that still cling defiantly to the cliffs, even to this day. Napoleon also came here. But even all this couldn't drown Havar's spirit. Life always returned to the fields. Lavender bloomed purple over the terraces, rosemary and olive trees tangled the hillsides, and wine flowed from vineyards that the Greeks once planted. And still, the culture lived. In the 17th century, the island founded something unheard of: the first ever public theater in Europe. Before, theaters were meant for kings and nobles alone, but this one was a place where commoners and nobles sat together beneath carved stone arches, watching plays lit by candlelight. The locals also founded the first ever professional European Tourist Association. Tourism began early with the formation of the Hygienic Society of Hvar in the 19th century. Today, Hvar is known as the Island of Lavender and is crowned the Queen of the Dalmatian Islands. In the square of St. Stephen, the Cathedral of St. Stephen rises. Its bell tower, also built back in the Renaissance, once warned of Ottoman raiders. In the Benedictine nunnery, unseen by any but a few, the sisters weave agave lace. The threads are pulled from the agave fibers, knotted into impossibly delicate patterns, each one unique, each one a prayer captured in cloth. High above the town, you can still see the ancient cannons aimed out to sea, and below them, the glittering sweep of the Pakleni Islands, looking like little emeralds. There's more sunlight in a year than almost anywhere else in Europe, and the rich history in every festival, in the beauty of the Holy Week processions, and in the old songs that drift on the sea breeze.
Well, this eerie Lake Huron discovery may be that it possibly contains the remnants of an entire civilization. Whoa, wait, sounds like Atlantis, right? Well, not exactly. But if there really had been an ancient underwater civilization here, it must have been a pretty advanced one. Around 10,000 years ago, two sharp glassy flakes broke off a stone tool and landed on the ground unnoticed. They stayed buried there for thousands of years, until 2013. Then scientists pulled up a small chunk of mud, about the size of a milk carton, from the bottom of Lake Huron, 100 feet underwater. Inside the mud, they found those same two flakes made of obsidian, a shiny black volcanic glass that forms when lava cools quickly. After careful testing, they realized these flakes came from Central Oregon, which is quite a distance, about 2,500 miles away. They found this prehistoric Great Lakes site on the Alpena Amberley Ridge, an underwater landform that once connected what's now Michigan and Ontario. Back then, it was dry land. Early humans used it to build traps for animals like caribou as the Ice Age faded and the Great Lakes began to form. Now, obsidian was the high-tech material of ancient times. It's super sharp and perfect for making tools. If you study the flakes carefully, it's obvious that humans made them. You can see where they struck them and the feathered edges that come from being carefully chipped. That means people were not only crafting tools here, but they also had access to obsidian that came from incredibly far away. It was likely possible through a huge trade network that spanned across the continent. For over 100 years, people have guessed that ancient societies might have existed beneath the Great Lakes, but no one had proof. That's why work on this submerged archaeological site is so important. A team of researchers has been trying to learn more about the 10,000-year-old ruins and the civilization that left them behind for over a decade now. Lake Huron's icy water acted like a time capsule that helped preserve things for thousands of years. So far, researchers have found not only unique stone tools, but also ancient trees with roots still intact and underwater peat bogs that preserved seeds and leaves. It was like an Ice Age version of Pompeii, a scene frozen in time. These discoveries are also helping scientists create new technologies and ways to do underwater archaeology. They've engaged sonars, underwater robots, and divers so far. Now, it's pretty cool that the tools they found on the Alpena Amberley Ridge were way smaller than other tools from the same era found nearby. That might mean a different group of people lived here, and they had their own unique way of life. Even the peat bogs they found, which are about 9,500 years old, hold secrets. They're full of pine needles, seeds, and leaves that could reveal what the environment was like back then. Usually stuff like this breaks down quickly on land, but the cold freshwater preserved it. The Michigan team is working with scientists in Cambridge, England, to extract DNA from the remains. If it works, it could finally confirm what animals lived there, and maybe even more. There are still years of discovery on this prehistoric Great Lakes site ahead. Another famous submerged archaeological site is the lost city of Pavlo-Petri. Archaeologists think it is the oldest sunken city in the world they've found and made official so far. Pavlo-Petri is around 5,000 years old. That means it existed even before the legendary Greek heroes in Homer's stories. Scientists first spotted it way back in 1904, and then mostly forgot about it until 1967, when Nicholas Fleming rediscovered it. He described it as a Bronze Age city now lying under about 10 to 13 feet of water. A year later, he returned with a team of scientists to study the ruins. Over 6 weeks, using just hand tapes and a basic grid, they managed to map out the city. They found that it covered almost 1,000 feet by 500 feet and had at least 15 buildings, courtyards, 5 streets, 2 tombs, and around 37 small stone graves. They also found signs that the ruins continued onto the nearby island of Pavlo-Petri itself. They dug up some amazing pottery, obsidian, and chert blades, and even a tiny bronze figurine that may date all the way back to 2800 BCE. Most of the buildings, though, came from the period between 1650 and 1180 BCE. Then scientists left the site alone again until 2009, when a super team of researchers launched a new 5-year project to really dive deep into the history of Pavlo-Petri. This time, they had digital mapping tools and better diving equipment, so they could explore and even excavate underwater. They found another 97,000 square feet of buildings, including a large hall and hidden streets. Plus, they dug up even more pottery that showed people had been living in the city from about 3000 BCE to 1100 BCE, and that the city once had a population of 500 to 2,000 people. No one knows for sure how the city ended up underwater, but many scientists think it was because of an earthquake, maybe around 1000 BCE, or even as late as 375 CE. Because it's the oldest underwater city ever found, some people even believe Pavlo-Petri might have inspired the legend of Atlantis. Another contestant for the Atlantis title lies near Japan. Back in 1986, a local diver was exploring the waters near the Ryukyu Islands when he found a giant structure made of perfectly shaped steps and sharp edges. It was 82 feet underwater. Today, the Yonaguni Monument is one of the most mysterious underwater sites on the planet. The structure is nearly half a football field in size. It looks like a massive stone pyramid with layers of platforms and steps stacked one on top of another. No one really knows where it came from or who built it. Some experts think the monument might be more than 10,000 years old, which would make it older than the Egyptian pyramids. One theory is that it could be the last remains of a lost civilization called Mu, a mythical Pacific society kind of like Atlantis. Others believe an ancient culture that lived in Japan as early as 12,000 BCE might have built it. But many scientists and geologists are skeptical about this possible underwater ancient civilization, even though Yonaguni has narrow passageways, arched openings, and right angles that almost look like city blocks. They say that the site looks a lot like natural rock formations, like the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland, for example. The whole monument is still connected to a bigger chunk of bedrock, which means it wasn't built piece by piece. And the way the layers of rock are stacked probably has more to do with earthquakes and tectonic movement. It's located in the very active Pacific Ring of Fire. One marine geologist kept going back down there, and every time he found something new. He says he spotted tool marks in the rock, symbols carved into stone faces, and even rock formations shaped like animals. He believes these carvings point to a culture that came from mainland Asia. He said he had identified 10 different structures off Yonaguni. including a ruined castle, a triumphal arch, 5 temples, and even a huge museum. These buildings seem to be connected by roads and channels, and some parts are surrounded by what could be giant stone walls. The explorer believes the city is at least 5,000 years old, based on stalactites found in underwater caves nearby, which would have only formed after the caves flooded. His supporters say they have never seen an earthquake create shapes like this, above or below water. But skeptics blame it all on erosion and insist that whirling underwater currents and sea creatures left holes in the rock. Now, if you want to form your own opinion about it, the spot is open for visitors, and it's definitely a super fun diving experience.
Welcome to one of the most mysterious and unexplored places on Earth. But what's so special about that? It's just some icy peaks and the endless snowy expanse of Antarctica. Yeah, that's right. But there's still a planetary scale mystery here. No matter how hard you try, you won't see a hidden mountain range, giant, unexplored land where no human has ever set foot, and it lies under another layer of mountains. It's like a nesting doll, but the size of a continent. These mountains hide Antarctica secrets, and these secrets can tell us something awesome about the ancient history of our planet. This gigantic unexplored territory in Antarctica is called the Gambritsev Subglacial Mountains. And the layer of ice above keeps this place untouched by nature and people. It's like a land inside another land, and it hides more than just mountains. There are valleys, hills, and plains. The whole area is similar to the European Alps, but unfortunately, we can't enjoy the view. Those mountains were first discovered in 1958 using seismological instruments. More than half a century has passed since then, and this place still remains one of the most poorly studied tectonic objects on Earth. Why? Because it's ice. A lot of ice. Who knows? Maybe there are some unknown ancient artifacts lying there. What if they're hiding a secret city or spaceships? It's unlikely, of course, but it would still be interesting to look there. Think about it. Hundreds or even thousands of miles of land that have remained unchanged for hundreds of millions of years. Even if no new species of animals or remains of an ancient civilization are there, this place still has a history. The history of the formation of continents on our planet. And scientists have already figured out some of this story. The mountains buried in Antarctica were originally like ordinary mountains, but as a result of a planetary scale event, they just… Wait a minute. Have you ever wondered how mountain ranges are formed? We see them in real life, in movies, in photos on the internet. We climb them. But how did they appear? Mountains have not always existed on the planet in this form. They appeared as a result of a large-scale collision of tectonic plates. Two giant solid chunks of ground are moving toward each other, then crash, and boom! Millions of tons of the Earth's crust pile on top of each other, mix, and form ledges and gorges. And all this can last for millions of years. Yes, it's a disaster, but it's very slow. Some tectonic plates are still colliding. For example, the Himalayas continue to grow because the Indian and Eurasian plates are still ramming into each other. And this process began about 50 million years ago. The Gambritsev Mountains under ice experienced a similar event, only much earlier. An article in the journal Earth and Planetary Science Letters says that they appeared during the formation of the supercontinent Gondwana. Two giant pieces of land were separated by a boundless ocean. But then, about 700 million years ago, they collided and formed Gondwana. This supercontinent included the territories of modern Africa, South America, Australia, India, and Antarctica. The giant pieces crashed into each other and released a stream of hot, partially molten rock. This mess grew bigger and bigger, forming mountains. The temperature of those mountains grew, their mass increased, and at some point, Gondwana became unstable. The supercontinent began to collapse under its own weight. The hot rocks below the surface began to flow sideways as a result of a process called gravitational spreading. Take toothpaste and start squeezing it out of the tube. Approximately the same thing happened with billions of tons of red-hot rock. Ancient mountains in Antarctica appeared right during this catastrophic event. You've just watched a visual simulation of global events that took place hundreds of millions of years ago. It looks cool, but how did scientists figure it out? How did they see this planetary-scale destruction? If the Gambritsev Mountains under ice is one of the most unexplored places in the world, then how could people find out its origin? The answer is simple. Tiny particles of rock have told us about the changing landscape of the planet. These are zircons, but scientists also call them time capsules. This mineral is very handy and resistant to mechanical and chemical influences. It's difficult to crush, it doesn't get affected by erosion, and it doesn't dissolve in water. And there's uranium inside it. This chemical element shows scientists the age of the rock. The fact is that uranium always decays into lead at the same rate. Scientists look at the ratio of uranium and lead and determine the age of minerals with great accuracy. Okay, this sounds a bit complicated. Here's a simple example. Imagine that each mountain belt is a clock that starts ticking at the moment of its formation. That is, after the collision of tectonic plates. After the rock forms, uranium begins its slow decay. The more time passes, the more uranium turns into lead. The rate of this decay is always the same. This decay can last for billions of years. The less uranium is in zircons and the more lead, the older the rock is. And this is how it happens in practice. Geologists take several rock samples. In a lab, they crush it to extract crystalline zircons. Geologists then dissolve the particles in acid to separate uranium from lead. Then they use a special device, a mass spectrometer that accelerates atoms and sorts them by mass. This is a rather complicated process, but the bottom line is that this device shows scientists the amount of uranium and lead. They look at the ratios of these two elements and calculate the age of the rock. Geologists took zircons from sandstones near the Gambritsev Mountains, studied those particles, looked at the level of uranium, and calculated the chronology of mountain formation. Then they compared the data obtained with the history of our planet and realized that the mountains buried in Antarctica appeared during the formation of the supercontinent Gondwana. But how did they find out that the supercontinent included Australia, India, and Africa? Zirconia from those Antarctic rocks turned out to be very similar to zirconium from those countries. That is, a long time ago, these three continents were together. So, the Gambritsev Mountains began to grow about 650 million years ago. About 580 million years ago, they reached the height of the Himalayas, and 80 million years later, they experienced the melting of the Earth's crust. And while most of the mountain ranges on the planet were changing and collapsing, the Gambritsev Mountains under ice remained untouched. Water, soil, wind, earthquakes, gravity, and other natural forces destroy mountain belts. This process is called erosion. But mountains buried in Antarctica haven't experienced anything like this. The cold temperature and the ice sheet around them kept this range unchanged. It's one of the best preserved ancient mountain belts on the planet. Okay, but why do we need to explore these mountains? What difference does it make that the supercontinent Gondwana collapsed in the past? It's possible that plants, frozen bodies of insects, or ancient bacteria have remained preserved under thick layers of ice. What about ancient animals? Many species could have lived on Gondwana. Studying ancient mountains in Antarctica can show us what the planet looked like about 500 million years ago. When Antarctica was a green continent, what lived on it? What happened to this life? Is it possible to revive those ancient creatures after so many years? If scientists were able to calculate the date of the supercontinent's appearance using tiny particles, then imagine what they could find after examining this hidden mountain range. It all sounds very interesting. But there's one problem. To take a small piece of this unknown world, you need to drill through a lot of ice, You need to deliver heavy equipment to one of the most inaccessible continents in the world, build stations, obtain an energy source, and conduct large-scale research. It sounds incredibly expensive, so this hidden territory will probably remain a mystery for a long time. Let's just hope that some billionaire will want to find out Antarctica's secrets and arrange a large-scale expedition there.
The Sahara Desert is like a Mad Max movie. Scorching heat, endless dunes, and an overall barren wasteland. A place where no one could live, right? Well, forget all you know about it. Because 5,000 years ago, the Sahara was a lush paradise of grasslands, lakes, and rivers, and the home of a ghost civilization that vanished without a trace. Our tale begins in the 1930s, when a Hungarian explorer stumbled upon a cave in the middle of the Sahara. Inside, he found something bizarre: ancient rock paintings of people swimming in a lake, surrounded by giraffes, hippos, and crocodiles. At the time, everybody shrugged it off as some symbolic depiction of the afterlife, because really, who would imagine a lake in the Sahara? Well, fast forward some 70 years later, when a group of archaeologists made a discovery that flipped the script. In a rock shelter in Libya, they unearthed 15 mummies, along with baskets, ceramic pots, and other everyday items. This may look like prehistoric junk to most people, but to archaeologists, it was like uncovering a key piece of evidence. Those people weren't just passing through, they lived here. You see, those weren't just any mummies. They were some of the oldest naturally mummified humans ever found, dating back over 7,000 years. Take that, Egypt. 2 of them still had readable DNA, preserved thanks to a rare natural mummification process, almost a miracle considering the Sahara's climate's ability to turn everything into, well, beef jerky. Scientists struggled to understand where those mummies came from for a while, because the mitochondrial DNA they recovered was not helpful at all. But thanks to scientific progress, they eventually managed to do a full genome analysis that revealed some weird secrets. Those people belonged to a human lineage that was completely unknown, and they lived isolated from the rest of humanity for thousands of years. For decades, researchers assumed that the place where they lived, the Green Sahara, was like a prehistoric highway, a lush corridor that humans and animals used to migrate between sub-Saharan Africa and the Mediterranean. But the mummies demolished that theory, like a hippo sitting on a sandcastle. Their DNA showed zero genetic mixing with sub-Saharan and Eurasian migrants, keeping their genes pure for 7,000 years. Their closest genetic relatives weren't their neighbors living right below the famous desert, but some ancient hunter-gatherers from Morocco, and even some guys that lived in the Czech Republic, when it wasn't even a country yet, 50,000 years ago. We're not out of the woods yet, because those mummies also carried some teeny-tiny traces of Neanderthal DNA, just 10% of the amount found in modern Eurasians. Now, if you paid attention in school, then you know that Neanderthals lived in Europe and Asia, and early humans only mixed with them after migrating out of Africa. But those Green Sahara folks never left Africa. So how did they get Neanderthal genes? The leading theory is that their ancestors mingled with Neanderthals in North Africa 50,000 years ago before settling in the Sahara and cutting off contact with the outside world. Archaeologists also found cattle bones and tools made of stone and wood at that rock shelter, proving that those people led a thriving pastoral lifestyle. This discovery made scientists scratch their heads for a while because, you see, animal domestication was not developed in Africa. So how did they learn it if they never mingled with anyone? Did they have ancient YouTube tutorials? Probably not. The researchers believe they must have traded knowledge with neighboring groups, but just knowledge, no saliva. It's almost too hard to believe that no outsiders mixed with them. After all, who wouldn't want to live in a thriving civilization in the middle of a green paradise, drinking milk, eating meat, and even using animal blood as a protein source? Ooh, yummy. They didn't have to hunt for every meal, thanks to their livestock, and the abundant water made life pretty sweet. And yet, they never married outsiders. Why? Maybe it was a cultural choice to never date outside their own group. Or maybe the landscape itself kept them isolated. This is where scientists place their bets. They believed that the dense forests and rivers that existed in the Green Sahara acted like nature's no trespassing sign, creating a geographical barrier that isolates animals, plants, and whole societies. This isolation is the reason why their genes were so unique. These guys weren't swapping spit with anyone else. But this genetic time capsule almost didn't survive. For most of the last ice age, the Sahara was even harsher than today, a true dead zone where humans couldn't survive. 70,000 years ago, even the toughest people disappeared, retreating to the Nile Valley and the Mediterranean coast. Why? Because Earth was a climate bully. Massive glaciers stole all the moisture, weakening monsoons until rain clouds barely reached North Africa. Then came the knockout punches. Armadas of icebergs flooded the North Atlantic, triggering devastating droughts each time. This was the Sahara's ultimate keep-out era. Now, you're probably wondering how in the world the Sahara turned green after all this, and then went back to being a desert again. Well, it all started 15,000 years ago, I wasn't around then, when Earth was shaking off the last ice age. Our planet's axis was a bit wobbly, and because of that, the northern hemisphere got closer to the sun, getting extra sunlight and heat. This eternal summer turned North Africa into a giant moisture magnet, pulling water from the Atlantic and making it all rain down on the Sahara. The result of this ridiculous amount of rain was a lush savanna, complete with lakes the size of small countries. But the African humid period was not just a one-time miracle. The truth is, this eternal on and off switch between green and desert happened to the Sahara more than 230 times since the desert was born. During one of these events, the Sahara even expanded, getting bigger than it is today. So when the Green Sahara showed up, you can bet it brought the ultimate ecosystem glow-up. This wasn't just a light dusting of grass. We're talking full makeover. The transformation was so complete, it even reshaped animal populations. Cheetahs suddenly struggled with the new prey dynamics, while rodents like the multi-mammate mouse thrived in the suddenly abundant grasslands. But don't pack your prehistoric swim trunks just yet. This paradise had teeth. The Sahara was an ecological maze of crocodile-infested rivers, malaria-carrying mosquitoes, and big cats lurking in the tall grass. Crossing it would have been like playing a real-life game of Hungry Hungry Hippos. This is probably why more groups didn't settle permanently. The Sahara's climate cycled between wet and dry every 20,000 years, hardly a stable zip code. For most ancient people, it was smarter to treat the Green Sahara like an all-you-can-eat buffet, grab resources and leave before the desert returned. Still, this Green Sahara period lasted for 10,000 years, giving our mystery shepherds plenty of time to thrive. But around 5,000 years ago, Earth's axis shifted again, the rains moved away, and the Sahara dried up faster than a puddle in July. As the desert returned, the shepherds from the Green Sahara had no choice but to pack up their livestock and leave. Some researchers believe they migrated toward the Nile, laying the groundwork for ancient Egypt, so I guess their legacy lives on. Besides, their pure lineage may be extinct by now, but some faint genes of the mummies can still be found in the people that live in North Africa today. But the introvert mummies were not the only ones using the Green Sahara as an Airbnb. They actually had neighbors just around the corner, in a lakeside village in Niger to be exact. Those people thrived for 5,000 years and left behind the oldest Sahara Desert cemetery, including a man buried in a turtle shell, a grinning Halloween man with filed teeth, and a heartbreaking family embrace frozen in time, victims of the very waters that sustained them. Eventually, those people disappeared too, just like it happened to our antisocial friends. This proves that this desert outsmarts everyone, with a landscape that gives paradise with one hand and takes it away with the other.
Not many civilizations are as mysterious as ancient Egypt, a powerful empire that lasted over 3,000 years. It gave us pyramids that still stand and myths that still inspire. It's one of the most explored places on Earth, yet somehow we still find exciting stuff. In Abydos, archaeologists just uncovered a 3,600-year-old royal tomb. It's huge! It has golden hieroglyphs of deities covering the entrance, but the pharaoh's name? It's not there. It's missing. Who was this ruler? And what new chapter could this open in Egypt's story? If there's one place in Egypt where the line between life and demise feels thinner, it's Abydos. To the ancient Egyptians, this was sacred ground. They believed it was the burial place of Osiris, the god who literally passed away, had his remains separated, and came back to life to rule the underworld. Because of that, Abydos became Egypt's spiritual gathering place. Pharaohs built amazing temples here, like the Temple of Seti, famous for its King's List, a wall that has the names of 76 pharaohs carved in it. Pilgrims came from across Egypt, leaving offerings and participating in Osiris festivals, where his demise and rebirth were ritually reenacted. It wasn't just symbolic worship, it was Egypt's version of Comic-Con. But instead of cosplaying superheroes, people reenacted gods coming back to life. Obviously, pharaohs competed to be buried as close to Osiris as possible. Abydos became part cemetery, part holy city, part afterlife insurance policy. Fast forward thousands of years, and we still uncover remarkable stuff around Abydos. That's the case with the recently discovered tomb. In early 2025, a joint team of researchers from the US and Egypt decided to dig beneath a rocky rise ominously called Anubis Mountain. You remember Anubis, the jackal-headed deity who guarded cemeteries. The uncovered royal burial was hidden 23 feet below the surface. Sadly, even though it eluded archaeologists for so long, robbers had already taken away with treasures ages ago. They could definitely tell this was a tomb of someone super important. Similar to how you can walk around a mansion with no furniture but still deduce that someone rich must have lived there. The chamber had mud brick vaults rising over 16 feet. That's taller than a female giraffe standing upright. For something built 36 centuries ago, it still felt enormous. However, when you remember that Egyptians were masters of architecture, nothing seems surprising. So no treasures, no golden mask, and sadly, no name. The cartouche that should have spelled the king's identity was unreadable. Egyptian tombs usually bragged about who was inside. In ancient Egypt, a cartouche was basically a big oval name tag for kings wrapped in hieroglyphs. Think of them as VIP passes that worked in both this life and the next. Without it, your soul couldn't check into the afterlife hotel. That's because to the Egyptians, your name, your Ren, wasn't just so your teacher could distinguish you from kids with the same haircut. It was a core part of who you were. As long as your Ren survived, so did you. To have your name forgotten was considered a fate worse than passing away. A soul cannot journey without a name. That's why you'd see cartouches all over the place, on temples, obelisks, jewelry, statues, and tomb walls. It wasn't there just for the marketing. It kept the pharaoh's presence front and center everywhere you looked. Imagine building a massive tomb only for 3,600 years later to walk in and go, who is this guy again? Not cool at all. That's why it's fair to imagine our nameless pharaoh haunting the robbers for all eternity. So yeah, cartouche was considered very significant. One of the most famous and mind-blowing examples comes from the tomb of Thutmose III. His burial chamber and sarcophagus were literally shaped like a cartouche. In other words, the entire room was a living architectural symbol of his name. Thankfully, in the recently discovered tomb, not everything was erased. Painted in golden hues at the entrance were two familiar guardians, deities Isis and Nephthys. Isis was the magician who stitched Osiris back together and breathed life into him. Nephthys, her sister, was the eternal mourner and protector of the mummy. Together, they promised that whoever rested here would not face the afterlife alone, and it's one additional proof of the importance of the mysterious pharaoh. So, who could this be? To answer that, we need to go down history lane. This tomb dates back to Egypt's messy chapter called the Second Intermediate Period. Instead of one ruler in charge, the country had many rival kingdoms, each with its own little power base, like a real-life Egyptian version of Game of Thrones. And right in the middle of that chaos was Abydos. For a while, it was home to its own line of kings, the so-called Abydos dynasty. Those weren't the pyramid builders everyone knows, and that's why they're so mysterious. They left behind almost nothing. No great monuments, no sprawling cities, just fragments of names on broken blocks. For centuries, many scholars even doubted they existed at all. That sorta changed in 2014 when archaeologists uncovered the tomb of Senebkay, one of those shadowy kings. Now, everything we know about Senebkay points to him having quite a story to tell. His bones revealed 18 deep wounds, the kind you get in battle. He had blows to his skull, back, and hands, and likely lost his life fighting, making him one of the few pharaohs we know who sadly fell in combat. His tomb was modest, with reused artifacts from earlier kings, but it delivered one priceless thing: proof. Until Senebkay, the Abydos dynasty was just a theory. With him, it became real. And that's why the new discovery could be a big deal. The newly uncovered royal tomb at Abydos shares the same layout and style as Senebkay's. It has limestone chambers, mud brick vaults, and protective deities, although it's much bigger. Which again raises the possibility that we're looking at an even earlier, more powerful ruler of Abydos. Whoever he was, he wanted to be remembered alongside the greats. Which is ironic, because it seems that history tried erasing him. Perhaps additional findings alongside his tomb could tell us more. Yes, there's more, and it's actually pretty cool. Not far from Abydos, in the village of Banawit, archaeologists uncovered a Roman-era pottery workshop. Yeah, you heard that right, a pottery factory close to a pharaoh's burial ground. The site had huge clay kilns, storage rooms, and even broken shards called ostraca. They were basically ancient sticky notes. Except instead of shopping lists, those had receipts scratched onto them in Greek and Demotic Egyptian. Little records of everyday transactions, the kind of thing you'd never expect to find near a lost dynasty king. Honestly, the potters missed a chance. Forget boring receipts. They should have been selling Osiris's mugs and Anubis figurines to pilgrims and tourists. But that's not all. It seems that centuries later, during the medieval period, the same ground became a cemetery. Archaeologists found mud brick graves with skeletal remains. This could mean that Abydos kept its aura of significance for hundreds of years after the Age of Pharaohs. So why this hill again and again? Is this place really a getaway to the afterlife? It is, after all, the very place where Osiris is said to rest. That belief lingered like a shadow for thousands of years, strong enough to pull in pharaohs and later medieval families. Different rituals, same sacred ground. Although, to be fair, the Romans weren't here for Osiris. They came to make pots. The story of Abydos is not over. The excavations will continue, and who knows what else could be discovered in the future. Today, archaeologists are armed with tools that are basically X-ray glasses for the desert. Every scan could reveal a hidden chamber, or if we're lucky, finally give our nameless pharaoh his wren back to him. In fact, I became strangely invested in finding out who he was. So let's hope for some news soon. It's only a matter of time. Do you have your own theories? Let me know.
Waves are crashing higher than ever before, about to swallow one of the world's most mysterious islands. By 2080, rising seas could crash all the way up to Ahu Tongariki. It's the famous ceremonial platform on Rapa Nui, aka Easter Island. Unfortunately, that's not just a guess. Researchers at the University of Hawaii at Manoa have already run the numbers and shared their findings in the Journal of Cultural Heritage. Their study shows that up to 51 other cultural landmarks, including the iconic Moai statues, could face flooding. But before we get to all that drama, let's learn more about Rapa Nui itself. This is the original name of Easter Island. People from Polynesia settled there way back, around 300 CE. Once they made themselves comfortable, they started creating their own wild and creative culture. Between the 10th and 16th centuries, they built massive ceremonial platforms called ahu and huge statues called moai, made to honor ancestors. Those giant figures still stand today, giving the island a mysterious vibe. Rapa Nui National Park protects all this. It's a Chilean wildlife area, the heart of Rapa Nui culture. The architecture and sculptures here are totally unique, even compared to other Polynesian islands. Easter Island is super remote, literally the farthest inhabited island in the world, sitting 2,300 miles from mainland Chile. The island covers 64 square miles, and the World Heritage Site takes up about 27 square miles, including 4 tiny nearby islets. Rapa Nui National Park is full of archaeological treasures. Experts estimate there are about 900 moai, more than 300 ahu, and thousands of other structures for farming, funerals, houses, and daily life. The moai are incredible. Some stand 6.5 feet tall. Others reach almost 66 feet. Most were carved from yellow-brown lava using simple basalt tools called toki. Some moai were still being carved. Some were being moved to their final ahu, and some were torn down and re-erected. The quarries, like Rano Raraku, show us today how the carvings were made. The ahu come in all shapes and sizes. The biggest is Ahu Tongariki, with 15 moai lined up on top of it. Most ahu have a raised platform of carefully worked stones, a ramp, often paved with smooth beach pebbles, and a flat area in front. Rock art is everywhere. You can find pictographs and petroglyphs in all kinds of styles. Caves hide even more carvings. Even villages, farms, and other structures are super interesting. By the 16th century, according to studies, the Rapa Nui society faced a big crisis. Natural resources ran low. The culture started to change. Many of the megalithic monuments were ruined. The ancestor cult was replaced by the man-bird cult. It was centered in Orongo by the Ranokau volcano. There are 54 semi-underground stone houses there, all shaped like ellipses and decorated with carvings about birds and fertility. This cult lasted until the mid-19th century. It's probably no wonder that colonization brought huge changes. Livestock, forced relocation, and diseases cut the native population to barely over 100 people. Today, the island is home to descendants of the original Rapa Nui people as well as immigrants, detailed computer models to track waves along the shore. Then they stacked those flood maps on top of data about all the cultural landmarks which they got thanks to local partners. They wanted to see which ones would get hit first. The results were pretty intense. Sea level rise is threatening coastlines everywhere, but the question now is when and how bad. The researchers' timeline shows that waves could crash all the way to Ahu Tongariki by 2080. That's the famous platform with the moai statues, the heart of the island's culture. The data is clear and the clock is ticking. The island's people need to start planning now before the sea starts taking what's theirs. And Easter Island isn't the only potential disaster site suffering from the elements. The old city of Chanchan in Peru is feeling the heat from extreme weather. It used to be the capital of the Chimu Empire and is basically the biggest pre-Columbian city made out of earth in the Americas. The place was super advanced for its time. They had smart city planning, organized society, irrigation systems, and some amazing art. The Incas took over in the 1400s, but the ruins still show how sophisticated the Chimu were. It's now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's really important. And now, El Niño. The warm phase of a natural climate cycle called El Niño Southern Oscillation brings both heavy rains and long droughts to this place. These ups and downs have happened forever, but now they occur more often. Besides, rising groundwater is making the buildings unstable. To fight this, people are controlling the water table, fixing walls, documenting the architecture, training locals, raising awareness, and making disaster plans. Storms and shrinking sea areas are also causing problems for the 19th century whalers settlement on Herschel Island in Canada. It's so bad that buildings had to be moved inland to stay dry and avoid flooding. If erosion keeps going, locals might have to move them even more. and some structures are likely to be abandoned. Permafrost is also breaking down graves, which makes buried caskets topple and break. If we move to the mosque city of Bagharat in Bangladesh, we'll find that water and salty soil are wrecking stone buildings. Salt gets into the rocks and then expands when it gets wet. This causes the stones to crack and crumble faster. And this place is a UNESCO World Heritage Site too. It contains 360 mosques, public buildings, water tanks, mausoleums, bridges, roads, and other public buildings. People once constructed them from baked brick. Another place potentially in danger from rising seas and stronger waves is coastal Great Britain. There, weather conditions are threatening lots of historic castles. Hurst Castle in Hampshire, Tintagel in Cornwall, Peel Castle in Cumbria, Bayard's Cove Fort in Devon, Garrison Walls in the Isle of Scilly, and Kelshot Castle in Southampton all face danger. English Heritage says they need to fix walls and build stronger defenses to stop storm damage. Heavy rains and extreme weather are also hitting Edinburgh in Scotland. Flooding and landslides are a serious growing risk. Since 1970, annual rainfall has gone up 13%. The sandstone repeatedly gets wet and dries, which wears down Edinburgh Castle and erodes the volcanic rock it stands on. Is it going to topple one day? If nothing is done soon, time will show, I guess. Another super famous and touristy place that might get flooded soon is Venice in Italy. Its lagoon faces a serious threat from rising sea levels. Flooding is becoming more and more common. This puts the city's buildings and streets at risk. So, as you see, the problem of Rapa Nui aren't unique. Other coastal places like Hawaii face the same threat from rising seas. Ancient temples, sacred burial grounds, and other irreplaceable cultural sites are at risk, just like the moai and ceremonial platforms of Easter Island. The rising waters don't just threaten buildings, they put the history, traditions, and identity of entire communities in danger. Researchers are using data on coastal flooding to predict what could happen to Rapa Nui and other historical spots. They're mapping the risks, studying how seas will rise, and searching for ways to protect those precious places. The clock is ticking, and without action, some of the most sacred and ancient sites could be lost forever.
When you think of super pricey colors, gold, silver, and purple probably come to mind. But back in Pompeii, blue was the real showstopper. Known as Egyptian blue and later renamed Pompeian blue, this color was total luxury, glamorously coating walls in ancient Egypt as far back as 2500 BCE. And in Pompeii, the demand was so high that blue could cost more than even the ridiculously expensive purple. Finding a blue artifact from Pompeii is not easy, let alone a whole room. But in May 2024, archaeologists finally uncovered a completely blue room filled with murals, featuring female figures and symbols of the four seasons.
Oh wow, this is the blue room?
This gem was actually discovered ages ago during the Bourbon era, but it took until recently to finish a full excavation. The blue room isn't huge, about 86 square feet, but don't forget that vibrant blue is rare for Pompeian frescoes, usually saved for the fanciest spots. Experts think this room may have been a sanctuary for rituals or sacred stuff. Among the finds were bronze jugs, lamps, and 15 hefty amphorae. Amphorae were the Tupperware of ancient Rome, perfect for transporting liquids like olive oil, beverages, or garum, an infamous fermented fish sauce that Romans couldn't get enough of. Their tapered design meant they had to either stand on a rack or be buried in the ground, but that shape made shipping them really efficient. Also, the archaeologists found there were building materials for renovations and a ridiculous number of empty oyster shells. While you might think this room hosted some fancy shindigs with oysters and gallons of beverages in those amphoras, in reality, the shells weren't even leftovers from a posh dinner party. Instead, experts believe they were ground up to mix with plaster and mortar. The next find was unearthed around 2 decades ago, but the scientists only realized it in 2024. They had dug up the oldest cheese ever, clocking in at a whopping 3,600 years. The previous record holder was only 3,200 years old, found in an Egyptian tomb of some big shot named Tookmes. When they discovered that younger cheese, they found broken jars with this solid, whitish mass inside. It took some serious sleuthing to confirm it was cheese and not some ancient science experiment gone wrong. But let's go back to this 3,600-year-old cheese. It wasn't just sitting around like any old lump. It was actually a fashion statement. It was found in the tomb with the mummy of a young woman from northwestern China. She had the cheese hanging around her neck like some sort of dairy bling. Now let's talk taste. When experts were asked if they'd try the cheese, their answer was a swift no way. So basically, nobody's diving in to find out if it's pungent or not. But thanks to some fancy tech, they can analyze flavors. But even if they had dared to try, I bet it's nothing to write home about since it's as hard as rock now. Scientists figured out this cheese was likely kefir cheese, made from fermenting milk with kefir grains and had both goat and cow milk in it. Funny enough, the ladies whose tomb it was found in belonged to the Xiaohe people, who were probably lactose intolerant. But don't fret. Despite their limited plant options, they could still enjoy cheese since this kefir delicacy had surprisingly low lactose levels. Remember when everything felt brighter? The grass greener, people friendlier, and trees looking regal? Okay, maybe I'm exaggerating about the grass and the folks, but not the trees. In 2024, some ancient plant fossils from New Brunswick, Canada, are making waves. They uncovered Sanfordiaculus densifolia, a tree over 350 million years old. It sported a trunk, flaunting over 250 massive leaves, some up to 5 feet long. Instead of a classic crown, it had a bottle brush appearance on a slim trunk just 6.3 inches wide. It's like this tree went to the gym and skipped leg day for leaf gains. Typically, ancient trees are depicted as basic trunks, but this one is a real standout. It's somewhat similar to today's ferns and palms, though palms came later. These fossils are well preserved, buried in an ancient fault lake after an earthquake. While many might just think, cool tree, scientists are excited. This discovery helps them piece together our planet's evolution over millions of years. I get it, those blue rooms, ancient cheese, and trees aren't exactly inspiring much hope for the future. But I've got something that might just change the game. In 2024, scientists discovered a new theoretically habitable planet called Gliese 12b. It's a bit smaller than Earth, but bigger than Venus, and is orbiting a mellow red dwarf star about 40 light-years away in the Pisces constellation. This star is just 27% the size of our Sun, and 60% as hot, which puts Gliese 12b in the Goldilocks zone, where liquid water could actually exist, even with its speedy 12.8-day orbit. If it's got no atmosphere, the surface temperature is about 107 degrees Fahrenheit, so if you're used to Arizona summers, you'll be just fine. The only problem is that Gliese 12b is 12 parsecs away, and sec here doesn't mean a quick second. With our fastest spacecraft, a trip would take around 225,000 years. To put it in perspective, if we imagine a regular human lifespan of 100 years, which is already slightly exaggerated, it will take about 2,250 generations to get there. Still, it's nice to know we have Gliese 12b on deck in case things go south here on Earth. And even if we never actually get there, studying it with the James Webb Space Telescope might help unravel the mystery of why Earth stayed livable while Venus didn't. Archaeologists in Egypt have made an exciting discovery. They found the upper half of a huge statue of Ramses II. This 12.5-foot limestone piece was uncovered in Hermopolis, now Ashmunain, and it lines up perfectly with the lower part found in 1930.
It took almost 100 years to finish the puzzle. The statue shows Ramses seated, wearing a crown and a headdress with a cobra, symbolizing his rule over both Upper and Lower Egypt. The back of the statue is covered in hieroglyphs, listing the king's numerous titles, highlighting his status as one of ancient Egypt's most powerful pharaohs. Combining the upper and lower pieces would create a statue nearly 23 feet tall. You probably know the Statue of Liberty was a French gift, but did you know that the famous Venetian lions were actually made in China and not Italy? Back in 1295, Marco Polo returned to Venice from a place called Cathay, we now know it as China, and shared some wild stories about everything from paper money to coal and even Kublai Khan's swanky palace in Xanadu. While some people back then rolled their eyes at his tales, modern scholars are still raising their eyebrows a bit. Despite the skepticism, Polo is a key figure connecting Europe to ancient China. Now, some recent research suggests Venice and China were already well connected before Polo's trip. A prime example? The Bronze Lion of Venice in St. Mark's Square. Researchers from the University of Padua believe that it actually came from Chinese copper around the lower Yangtze River more than 3,000 years ago, all due to a chemical analysis they ran in 2024. The winged lion became Venice's symbol between 1261 and 1264, probably even before Polo's adventures. Experts point out its resemblance to the Tang Dynasty tomb guardians, which hint it might have had a makeover on its way to Venice. 2024 is not only the year of scientific discoveries, but also the treasure hunt year. A 2-foot-tall bronze statue of the Greek deity Diana, once a fixture on the Titanic's fireplace mantle, was discovered during a recent underwater expedition. Discovering this statue was like finding a needle in a haystack, except the haystack is 2.5 miles deep in the ocean. It's just one of the many art pieces maritime archaeologists have been looking for among the Titanic's wreckage. It was more than just a luxury liner. It was filled with art treasures, from a 1912 Renault to this stunning statue inspired by a piece at the Louvre. Meet Hula Male, also known as the City of Hope. This nickname makes total sense since this artificial island is part of the Maldives' big plan to avoid being completely submerged in the near future. Hula Male was created by placing sand from the seafloor onto a submerged coral platform, and it worked. This city sits about 6 feet above sea level, which means it's twice as high as the Maldives' capital, Male. While more and more people are moving there to live, the island was also designed to serve as a temporary evacuation site during dangerous storms and typhoons. Seychelles is another gem in the Indian Ocean that's at risk of disappearing. Unfortunately, coastal flooding is becoming a common issue there, especially during spring tides and heavy rainfall. The problem is that their main island, Mahé, hosts about 90% of the country's population. Along the coast, it's only about 6 feet above sea level. Fiji is the third tropical paradise on our list, and it's also a top pick for travelers. But this nation is in a tough spot, since it's located right in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, where huge storms can really turn things into chaos. Take Cyclone Winston. It hit Fiji back in 2016 and ended up costing them over $1 billion in damage. So one thing they're doing to protect themselves is planting mangroves along the coast and preserving the ones that already exist. These trees are awesome since they help reduce wind speed during cyclone emergencies and also combat erosion by trapping sediments. Egypt might be in trouble too. I mean, it's not like the whole country is going to be underwater, and we'll only see the tips of the pyramids in a few years. But things could really change for them as coastal cities are facing a serious risk. Take Alexandria, for instance. 45% of its population already lives below sea level. If the city is flooded, not only will everyone have to move, but Egypt in general will suffer a major impact on its fish production. In Europe, one of the most at-risk populations is in the Netherlands, where about half the people live in areas below sea level. In the future, planning a romantic gesture with tulips for your girlfriend could become an impossible mission. The Netherlands is responsible for 2/3 of the world's tulip production. So if fields are taken over by saltwater, it's game over for the blooms. But the good news is that the Dutch have centuries of experience dealing with water, so knowing how to work with storm barriers and seawalls can prevent them from a doomsday scenario. The risks of rising sea levels probably aren't higher anywhere else than here in Tuvalu. This island chain, located halfway between Australia and Hawaii, could be the first state to become uninhabitable. Its stunning land is only about 9 feet above sea level. And just by looking at it on the map, you can see how narrow it is. In fact, the narrowest part in Fongafale is only about 65 feet wide. So even before higher tides become a real problem, the country's limited farmland could be flooded with saltwater. The next country on our list is the Philippines. This archipelago in Southeast Asia boasts some of the most stunning scenery, but it faces the risk of flooding for 2 reasons. First, due to rising sea levels, and second, because of crazy, unpredictable weather. Since 1990, events like cyclones, earthquakes, and tsunamis have cost the country over $20 billion. Have you ever heard of Vanuatu? This chain of islands, spread out between Australia and Fiji, could be flooded soon. Vanuatu was one of the first Pacific nations to relocate an entire community to a safer spot. Back in 2005, residents living in risky coastal areas of the northern island of Tegua moved to higher ground. Next up, the Marshall Islands, a country located in the Central Pacific. Studies show that 40% of the buildings in the capital city, Majuro, could end up underwater in the future. But this country isn't throwing in the towel just yet. They've got a game plan. They are fortifying the infrastructures of their low-lying airport, relocating key buildings to higher ground, and putting up seawalls on rural islands. Heading south, we've got Nauru. This is actually one of the smallest countries in the world, covering just 8.1 square miles. Today, it's home to 10,000 people, but it's on the brink of becoming uninhabitable. Water levels are rising about 3 times faster there than the global average. The Buada Lagoon sparks special concern since it's the only surface freshwater resource, and it's located only 16 feet above sea level. Our next stop in the Pacific Ocean is the Republic of Palau. Rising sea levels are no joke for them either, but protecting their crops, especially taro, is a priority at this moment. About halfway between Hawaii and New Zealand lies Samoa, and this country is dealing with a unique situation. Not only is the volume of water increasing there, but their land is also sinking. You see, a couple of strong earthquakes and tsunamis hit Samoa back in 2009. So as the crust bounces back to its original position, the overall land surface is actually going down. Because of this, their housing and main infrastructure could take a serious hit, especially since all their airports are along the coast. Let's head to Kiribati. This Pacific nation has a big problem with frequent flooding because most of its people and infrastructure are near the coast. Apart from the volcanic island of Banaba, none of Kiribati's land is more than 6.5 feet above the ocean. To tackle this situation and keep their population safe, they had this big idea of making a massive floating platform, kind of like the ones oil companies have. But the problem is that it would cost them a fortune, as the project is estimated to be around $2 billion. If visiting Vietnam is on your bucket list, you better hurry up. The top 10 things to do there mostly involve cruising to jaw-dropping spots like down to Ha Long Bay, also known as the Descending Dragons Bay. But by 2050, the surrounding land over there might be underwater. Another huge problem Vietnam is facing is that the main rice fields are getting salty. And if you're into Vietnamese food, you know how important rice is for them. Right now, they're especially concerned about the Mekong Delta region being vulnerable. After all, this is a highly fertile area responsible for most of Vietnam's agricultural output, with over 50% of it being, rice. This nation is really putting in the effort to adjust to this new reality.
They're flushing the rice fields in the Mekong Delta with fresh water to get rid of the saltiness. Our next stop is in the Caribbean Sea. Grenada is an island country, but you may know it as the Island of Spice since its tropical climate is just perfect for cultivating things like nutmeg, cinnamon, cloves, and ginger. Unfortunately, Grenada and its incredible fertile soil also face an uncertain future of being submerged. Let's talk about the last country on our list, the Solomon Islands. 5 islands in this archipelago have already vanished beneath the waves, and 6 others are submerged by 20%. They include the Nusa Evili Island, which was once a hotspot to go to for a picnic in the early 2000s. Even though the situation is complicated, it's important to note that more than 300 of the islands there are inhabited. One thing about the Solomon Islands is that it seems like they're always in some kind of recovery mode, since the country often gets hit by tropical cyclones and flash floods. Their population is already working hard to save their homes from the rising seas by building stone walls along the coast, planting mangroves, and constructing houses in higher areas.
It was 1905. A 13-year-old boy named Ben Sands grabs his lantern and slips into the Craighead Caverns in Sweetwater, Tennessee, a place he already knew like the back of his hand. But that day felt different. He was in the mood for a little more adventure, so he left the main trail behind and went deeper into the shadows. That's when our brave teen decided to squeeze into a narrow, muddy tunnel, barely as wide as a bicycle tire. He crawled for what felt like forever. Then, after about 40 feet, he finally popped out the other side and couldn't believe what was happening. He had water up to his knees. Yep, he was standing in the middle of a massive underground lake. The chamber was so huge, the light from his lantern barely reached the walls. Then, he had a great idea. He started tossing mud balls into the darkness as far as he could, just to test the ground ahead. All he heard in return was splash, splash, splash. It was all water. What Ben had discovered would later be named the Lost Sea, which is considered America's largest underground lake. It's also the second largest non-glacial subterranean lake in the world. The only one bigger is Dragon's Breath Cave, hidden on private land in Namibia. The underground lake in Craighead Caverns is so massive and mysterious, we haven't fully explored it. Thanks to top-notch equipment, divers have discovered more than 13 acres of water-filled rooms beneath the surface. But the visible part of the Lost Sea stretches only about 4 acres. One time, a brave diver entered one of the submerged chambers with a sonar device in hand. This kind of equipment works by sending out sound pulses underwater. When those sound waves hit something, they bounce back. Then, the device measures how long it takes for the echo to return and calculates how far away the object is. So, he was confident he could map the whole thing using sonar. But he also played it safe. He hugged the wall the entire time, the only way to make sure he'd find his way back. As he took surroundings in every direction, the results came back the same. Nothing but more water. To this day, no one has found the end of the lake, but they're not done yet. Each expedition reveals new chambers, new tunnels, and new mysteries. The funny part is, Craighead Caverns was already a well-known spot long before Ben stumbled across the long sea. And over the years, this cave has had some pretty unusual and kinda eccentric uses. The first people we know who used the cave were the Cherokee. The upper chamber served as a meeting place for their councils, and we know that because a wide range of Native American artifacts, including pottery, arrowheads, and jewelry, have been found in one of the rooms. Then, between 1939 and 1940, the cavern was turned into a mushroom farm. A few years later, in 1947, someone decided to build a wooden floor right inside the cave. That's when the underground nightclub known as the Cavern Tavern was born. And here's another fun fact. One of the cave's earliest visitors wasn't a person at all. It was a giant jaguar. It made its way deep into the cave about 20,000 years ago and apparently got lost in the darkness. It wandered for days before falling into a crevice far from any light. Some of its bones were found in 1939, and today they're on display at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. But I suppose nothing that's ever happened in the cave quite compares to what lies deeper inside. If you're feeling brave enough to explore its depths, you can actually take a boat tour across its underwater lake. That's right, there are excursion boats inside the cave, all powered by electric motors. It is probably a dark, cold, and strangely peaceful journey. And just below the boat, you will see some big rainbow trout swimming around. They weren't always there. People actually brought them in and released them into the underground lake. And according to visitors, the guides explained that it was all part of a bigger plan. They wanted to see if the fish would find an exit and reveal a hidden tunnel to another body of water. But the fish stayed put. So now, visitors have something else to look at during the ride. And since there's no natural food in the cave, the trout have to be fed by hand every single day. Guides also mentioned that one of the most fascinating features of the caverns isn't the lake or the trout. It's a crystalline structure known as anthodites, also called cave flowers. These are fragile, spiky clusters, and they are rare. Really rare. Now, here is a question. If Ben Sands discovered a lost sea out of nowhere, does that mean we could still find something similar? Well, yes. There are probably still many underground bodies of water hidden around the world. In 2016, for example, a massive reservoir of water was discovered deep beneath the Uturuncu volcano located in the Andes. But it's not like a calm, friendly lake. The water is dissolved into partially molten rock, so it's stunningly hot. We're talking about a temperature close to 1,830 degrees Fahrenheit. Then in 2021, scientists found a huge thermal lake inside a cave in southern Albania. And in 2024, they returned to the same spot with more advanced measurement equipment. They found that the lake measures 454 feet long and 138 feet wide. That pretty much confirmed it is the biggest hidden lake of its kind we know about. Also, in 2024, a group of workers from a travel agency was exploring Tung Cave in Vietnam when they suddenly came across a mysterious lake, hidden way down in a part of the cave that hardly anyone ever sees. Its water reflects a transparent emerald or greenish color, making it look unbelievably beautiful. This spot will probably be open to tourism very soon. Alright, finding hidden lakes inside caves or beneath volcanoes is one thing, but finding a hidden ocean inside the earth, that is a whole different story. And believe it or not, it actually happened not long ago. But you can't swim in its waters, for two big reasons. First, it's hidden about 400 miles underground. And second, the water isn't in liquid form like a normal sea. Instead, it's trapped inside solid rocks. Sounds strange, but let me explain. Back in 2014, researchers found deep pockets of magma located around 400 miles beneath North America. And that's a pretty strong sign there's water down there. But how? Down there, scientists discovered a mineral called ringwoodite, which only forms under extremely high pressure, the kind you would find deep within the Earth's mantle. And inside the structure of ringwoodite, they found water, not in puddles or pools, but trapped inside the mineral itself. Ringwoodite acts like a sponge, holding water within its crystal structure. And when scientists ran the numbers, they realized something staggering. The amount of water trapped in this mineral could be 3 times greater than all the oceans on Earth combined. And that is huge. Not just in size, but the actual discovery is huge, because it might confirm a theory that's been around for decades. That a massive reservoir of water exists deep beneath Earth's crust. Geologists believe this deep reservoir plays a key role in Earth's water cycle. It might be responsible for volcanic activity, the movement of tectonic plates, and even how water first appeared on the planet's surface. Instead of arriving on comets or asteroids, Earth's water might have always been here, slowly seeping out over billions of years from deep underground. Archaeologists recently found something fascinating from a forgotten Maya kingdom. a tomb hidden in a collapsing pyramid. Inside, there was a king buried for 1,700 years. A jade mask that looks almost human, but not quite. And all this thanks to the looters who missed it by just 6 feet. They stumbled upon it in 2022 in the dense jungles near the border of Guatemala, Mexico, and Belize. In Mayan times, this little place used to be called Xochitlam. It's a lost city, half swallowed by jungle. This place meant pretty much nothing compared to other big Mayan cities, like Tikal or Teotihuacan, or so we thought. The team found a tomb of a Mayan ruler. The artifacts, the names of kings, all this revealed that Xochitlam wasn't just some tiny village. It was a pretty important place for that culture, and what they found inside that tomb may rival the treasures of any Maya metropolis. The tomb's ceiling had collapsed long ago, but the offerings were still inside and remained intact even after centuries. They recovered over 16 spondylus shells. These things were used by the ancient elite for power and rituals. That meant that whoever the tomb was related to, it was someone wealthy, of high status, who got themselves a ceremonial burial. Archaeologists also found carved femur bones. They were etched with hieroglyphs and names. Maya literally wrote their history in human remains. Researchers want to dive super deep and get a DNA analysis on the bones. Maybe that will help uncover familial ties, origins, or health problems these people might have faced. And most important of all, the mosaic jade mask. It was pieced together from luminous green tiles into an expression that feels almost human, almost alive. A lot of people were joking that it's just like Jim Carrey's mask in the famous movie. But it wasn't a magical artifact. That was the face of a forgotten Maya king, staring out at us after 1,700 years of silence. His name was etched into the femur bones, Itzam Kokaj Balam. Historians think this might be the ruler who reigned around 350 BCE. Unfortunately, this period is super underdocumented. We barely know anything about those times, but it looks like he was pretty important to the locals. One of the bones even showed a carved figure holding a deity's severed head. The deity's head looks exactly like the jade mask. Perhaps this was supposed to be the king himself, defeating some mythological villain. Other inscriptions mention the king's father and grandfather. That links Xochitlam to the mighty Maya capitals we mentioned, Tikal and Teotihuacan. Tikal was once the beating heart of the Maya world. It was a fascinating megapolis. A city rose from the Guatemalan lowlands with towering step pyramids that scraped the sky. That place was home to tens of thousands of people. It was also a hub of art, astronomy, and culture. The rulers were worshipped almost as living deities. Their deeds were carved into stelae that still stand amid the howler monkeys. Teotihuacan was located even further north. Now that was a mystery of another kind. It wasn't really Mayan, but rather Central Mexican. But still, that was a true metropolis, one of the largest cities in the world during its time. It was most famous for its Avenue of the Dead and colossal structures like the Pyramid of the Sun. It was a rich cultural center that had a worldwide influence. For centuries, both Tikal and Teotihuacan seemed to have completely different cultures. Tikal was a flourishing city-state where people loved reading, astronomy, and beautiful architecture. Teotihuacan was a titanic militaristic superpower. Two big centers of Mexico, separated by 600 miles of jungle and mountains. Compared to these imperial capitals, Xochitlam was a whisper. But it looked like this Itzam guy from the tomb wasn't just a ruler of a random village. He seemed to have political ties in ancient Mesoamerica. The craziest part is that we almost lost this piece of history, all because of the looters. At some point in the past, grave robbers had tunneled dangerously close. They stopped digging just 6.5 feet away from the tomb. That's just like in that meme with the diamonds. Sometimes you stop digging right before you hit it big. But in our case, thank heavens they didn't get there first. That's how close we came to losing a piece of history. In an almost poetic irony, it was the looters' tunnels themselves that led Estrada Belli's team to the site. Archaeologists have been looking around and using the so-called LiDAR technology. That's basically laser beams shot from high above, which help them map the spot. It's like taking X-rays of the jungle floor. And that's when they found the little signs of intrusion. They quickly realized that if someone was digging here, they were probably looking for something important. Without the failing looters, they might have walked past a discovery. In any case, archaeologists want to keep searching. They might even find more chambers buried inside the abandoned pyramid. We just keep finding mysterious things related to the Maya. Recently, buried deep within the ruins of Tikal, archaeologists found a house. And in that house, a limestone altar. It was covered in vibrant murals of red, yellow, and black. What's weird is that this build wasn't made by Maya. It was unmistakably Teotihuacan in style. And just like the tomb from before, it was made about 1,700 years ago. The altar was discovered inside a Maya-era residence known as Group 6DX7. It stood 3.5 by 6 feet right in the center of the home. That was very typical for Teotihuacan traditions. It bore a mural of the storm god that was also a central deity in the Teotihuacan pantheon. But this altar depicted no kings and no rulers. That's very weird. As we said, Maya worshipped and honored their dynasties and political power, putting them pretty much everywhere, like some merch. But instead, this altar worshipped the deities alone, and it did so in the heart of Maya's main capital, Tikal. When archaeologists dived deeper, they saw it as unmistakable proof that Teotihuacanos not only came to Tikal, they thrived there. This house wasn't some trade outpost, people actually lived in it. Teotihuacanos built homes, practiced their rituals, and left their deities behind in this city. And Maya seemed to be chill about that. Researchers think this was a home for some elite people from Teotihuacan, or maybe it belonged to Mayans who practiced Teotihuacano culture and deeply respected it. But it might be something darker than a simple, friendly multiculturalism. The two cities weren't in the best relationship. There was some tension, maybe even surveillance. The house and the altar were probably built around 300 to 400 BCE. That was a period when Tikal was rising in power. This might have caught the attention of the mighty empire to the north. It's almost as if Mayans poked the beast. By 400 to 450 BCE, that attention may have become something sinister. The altar could have actually been the symbol of domination. Had the Maya of Tikal truly welcomed their guests, or did they come here and bluntly started building foreign altars in sacred spaces? Did Teotihuacan use this as some kind of soft invasion? In that case, it would make sense for Mayans to destroy that place or vandalize it somehow. Mayans regularly buried their buildings and rebuilt on top of them. But for some reason, this altar remained untouched. Mayans found it and buried it with the surrounding buildings as they were. No vandalism, no destruction, no rebuilding even. Looks like they had some complicated feelings about Teotihuacans. It was a time when cultures clashed, fused, overlapped, and possibly spied on each other. Perhaps one day we'll learn more about what really happened among these ancient civilizations.
Ever since Plato wrote about the allegory of Atlantis, humanity has been fascinated with the possibility of the discovery of a thriving underwater civilization. Fancy joining me on a trip to a few historic underwater sites? Let's see what we can find out about ancient civilizations. The first one on our list is what is being called the underwater Stonehenge. Scientists have recently discovered a mysterious pile of cairns that stretch for miles under the shimmering waters of Lake Constance at the borders of Switzerland, Germany, and Austria. Archaeologists began to explore the site back in 2015, and they haven't been able to understand yet what it was actually used for. What they do know is that there is a 12-mile line of 170 human-made stone cairns under Lake Constance. Scientists say this was most likely the result of a combined work of several villages. The cairn site was probably used for some collective purpose,
The formations are huge. Some of them are several dozen feet wide. The most amazing discovery so far is that the site dates back to around 5,500 years ago. Now, what were we humans doing back then? We were living in the prime years of the so-called Stone Age. We were beginning to make artifacts from stone and use them to hunt and eat. Can you imagine what a knife and fork might have looked like back in those days? It's no coincidence that scientists call this site the underwater Stonehenge, though. Both sites are believed to have been built around the same period of time. You see, Stonehenge dates back to around 3100 BCE. Both sites carry the distinct characteristic of stone monuments built in a circle. Not to mention the fact that scientists also haven't figured out why on Earth our early ancestors would feel the need to build a monument such as Stonehenge. Well, the mystery of Lake Constance hasn't been solved yet. Who were the Neolithic people from this area? And for what purpose did they go through such an amount of work and effort to build this huge stone site? Next, we're taking you on a tour of the Ryukyu Islands just off the coast of Japan. You're diving deep down to an archaeological site. But I should warn you, the waters of the Pacific Ocean are far from smooth. It doesn't take long before you see a huge structure, thanks to the sunlight shining down on the seabed. At first, it looks like Machu Picchu's ruins located across the globe in Peru. As you approach the site, you slowly figure out its forms. A pyramid-shaped structure, arches, staircases. It's something that could have easily been a palace or a castle. Could this be a sign of human activity? What you've just seen is known today as the Yonaguni Monument. It also goes by the name of Japan's Atlantis. The entire monument is about the size of 5 soccer fields and the height of a 5-story building. Its most surprising feature is its expanse of terraces. Explorers and scientists believe that Yonaguni might be 10,000 years old. But whether it's a human-made structure or a natural formation is still under debate. For Japan's top marine geologist, Professor Masaki Kimura, Yonaguni is the heritage of a lost civilization. Kimura has dived to the bottom of the ocean to explore the ruins over 100 times over the past 10 years. According to him, there are clear signs of human activity down there. On the monument's surface, there is a triangle-shaped concave that is a historical symbol of water fountains in the region. There's also a giant turtle carved on the eastern side of the structure. And, according to Kimura, turtles have an important cultural meaning. Several pieces of stone tools have been recovered from the site. Their estimated age is around 10,000 years. However, not all scientists support this theory. For many, Yonaguni is the result of thousands of years of erosion. The fact that the monument is composed of one massive rock leads them to believe it's not human-made. The defined edges and flat surfaces resemble a natural formation in Northern Ireland, known as the Giant's Causeway. The basalt columns look like the ruins of a palace, but they're actually the result of volcanic activity in the region. Now, you're flying to the coast of Greece, 4 hours away from Athens. More specifically, you're in the Peloponnese Peninsula. You dust off an old snorkel and head for a free dive on a bright sunny day. Sometime into the dive, you start noticing patterns on a seabed. 13 feet below the surface, outlines of familiar objects start to appear, one by one. As you continue swimming, what looks like the outline of an entire city emerges in front of your eyes. Are you wondering how water could have taken the whole city? Rocks are perfectly aligned into what appears to be the foundation of a building. This is Pavlopetri, an ancient city you've probably heard about for the first time. It was discovered by Nicholas Fleming, a British oceanographer, when he was on vacation in Greece. He had heard rumors about Pavlopetri's existence and indeed found several artifacts on the seafloor. He went back to the area a year later with the team. They found a site filled with pots, storage vessels, and tools. A kernstone, for instance, is a tool used for grinding grains and turning them into flour. Multiple amphoras indicate that this settlement dates back to the Bronze Age, 5,500 years ago, when people started living in towns. The settlement is believed to have existed for over 2,400 years. Today, Pavlopetri is considered the oldest submerged town ever discovered. And what's impressive is that it wasn't a simple village. It was a vibrant port city with stone buildings, a marketplace, streets, and even squares. The next stop on our voyage is one of today's most famous underwater cities that has been turned into an archaeological park. The city of Port Royal in Jamaica exists only below the surface, but in 1692 it was one of the wealthiest cities in the Western Hemisphere. Port Royal was the center of the British Empire at the time and an important trade city that attracted people from all over the region. It was also home to real-life pirates of the Caribbean. On the morning of June 7, 1692, the people of Port Royal met a different fate than they had probably expected. The city woke up shaking. People were thrown out of their beds by the power of a massive earthquake, ranking 7.5 on a Richter scale. One survivor said he had seen Earth opening up and swallowing the whole town. What he said could be true, as the city was mainly built on sand. The ground swallowed buildings, roads, you name it. Geysers erupted, and finally, waves as big as 10-story buildings hit the city. About 33 acres of the city disappeared under the water. Amazingly, most of its 17th century remains are still in good condition under 40 feet of water. Archaeologists have found taverns, storage rooms, kitchens, and recreational buildings used for diverse purposes. You can also see a grand lion statue, a submerged bridge, and many picturesque arches. Of course, I saved the best for last: India. Just off its coast lies another sunken marvel. A site known as the Lost City of Cambay is located in the Gulf with a similar name. It remained undiscovered until 2001, when the National Institute of Ocean Technology made a routine water assessment. With the help of sonar technology, which sends a wave sound to the bottom of the sea, they found something far beneath the surface. Images showed well-defined geometric shapes spread along a 5-mile stretch. The remains date to more than 9,500 years ago, meaning this civilization was lost at around the end of the Ice Age. Debris recovered from the site included construction material, pottery, beads, sculptures, and even bones. Scientists argue whether these artifacts are indeed from the site, but if they truly are, then the lost city of Cambay might be the oldest civilization in the world.
For centuries, the whole world was wondering how the giants of Easter Island moved around. Maybe powerful chiefs ordered big groups of workers to haul them. Or the elite controlled special statue-making quarries. But now we finally know the people of Rapa Nui didn't drag their moai statues into place like lifeless logs. They made them walk. Scientists looked at nearly 1,000 moai, checked their shapes, proportions, wear patterns, and the gentle forward lean and curved base that many statues have. And then it struck them. Those details weren't accidents, but engineering. The forward lean shifts the center of gravity, and the curved base lets the statue pivot like a pendulum. Once the motion starts, inertia helps carry each step. Think of it like walking an enormous stone toddler using ropes and balance. To prove this right, the research team built a 4.35-ton replica. The real statues were around 13 tons, and some weighed up to 80 tons. With 18 people on the ropes, they walked the statue about 300 feet, about the length of a football field, in 40 minutes. That's faster and easier than dragging something flat across logs or rollers. The old roads of Rapa Nui also helped the process.
They're about 14 feet wide, and the way they curve inward makes them perfect to keep a statue steady while it walks forward. Every time the islanders moved a moai, they weren't just walking it, but they were literally shaping the road as part of the job. When you look at the island's landscape today, you can actually see these paths crisscrossing each other, sometimes running side by side like alternate routes. The ancient workers were likely clearing a stretch of ground, moving the statue a bit, clearing a bit more, then rocking it forward again in a specific rhythm. It looks like they spent just as much time prepping the road as they did moving the statue itself. So, the ancient Rapa Nui didn't need thousands of workers or modern machinery, and it all worked with just ingenuity, rhythm, teamwork, and clever design. Their transportation wasn't the only moai mystery. People knew the statues were meant to honor important chiefs, but no one could explain why the ancient islanders picked those exact spots for them. Most of the moai sit right along the coastline, almost like they're guarding the island. So a team of scientists took a closer look at those locations, and the answer turned out to be all about water. Easter Island's volcanic soil is super porous, which means it soaks up rainfall quickly. Because of that, there weren't enough rivers or streams, and the island ended up with very limited fresh water. Hundreds of years ago, the people survived thanks to groundwater discharge. Basically, water stored deep underground in layers of rock or soil called aquifers eventually rises up to the surface on its own. When that water bubbled up near the coast, it mixed with seawater, but the mix stayed fresh enough to drink. The locals collected it right from those coastal spots, and that's exactly where they built the moai. They weren't just decorating the coastline, they were marking the island's most essential source of fresh water. Now, most of the moai bodies were made from volcanic tuff, a soft, easily carved stone, and most of the statues were carved in one quarry inside an ancient volcano. In October 2023, a wildfire tore through the quarry, and everyone who cares about Rapa Nui got really concerned about whether the site would survive future disasters. So when a team of scientists arrived in January the following year, a local community group asked if they could document the quarry, just in case another fire damaged it for good. The geographers jumped at the chance and launched about 30 drone flights over the quarry. Flight after flight, they collected an incredible 22,000 photos. After that, they spent months running those images through computer software that stitched every piece together into a single, hyper-detailed 3D model. Now anyone in the world can explore Ranu Raraku, one of Easter Island's most important quarries, without even setting foot on the island. Of course, the 3D model isn't just an online tour platform. The team noticed that there were several workshops inside the quarry, and carving techniques changed from one site to another. So there wasn't one chief who told them how to do it, but rather each spot worked like its own workshop that was tied to a specific family clan. This could also be another proof that the moai could move with far fewer people than anyone once believed, probably around 20 to 50. That's roughly the size of an extended family or small lineage group on Easter Island. Most statues were carved while lying on their backs from the top down. In the most common method, the carvers focused on the face first, shaping the eyes, nose, and mouth, and then carved the outline of the head and body around those features. The second method flipped that order. They carved the entire block into the basic shape of a moai first and didn't add any details until later. And in a few rare cases, the carvers went at the stone from the side and worked straight into a nearly vertical cliff, which must have taken some great skill. And just when researchers mapped over 1,000 moai and thought they knew them all, the island threw them a curveball. In the middle of a dried-up lakebed, a place no one expected anything, another statue appeared in 2025. It was the first statue found in a lakebed before, and it might not be the last. For at least 200 or 300 years, the laguna was almost 10 feet deep, so it would be impossible for humans to build or put a statue on the bottom. Scientists think the moai are over 500 years old. It's possible that the Rapa Nui people who built them probably brought the statue here when the lake was dry in the past. The new find turned out to be slightly over 5 feet tall, which is smaller than the other statues on the island. As the region continues to dry out, the lake bed has started revealing what it's been hiding for who knows how long. More statues could be tucked under those thick reeds that grew over the lake for centuries. Now that the water has receded, scientists might be able to use ground-sensing tools to detect what's buried beneath the surface. While researchers keep studying the statues and solving their mysteries, nature is playing against them. A new study shows that by 2080, seasonal waves could push far enough inland to hit some of Easter Island's massive Moai statues. These stone giants have stood through everything: harsh sun, relentless wind, pounding rain, lichen slowly creeping across their surfaces, and even wildfires. But rising sea levels already threaten the island's coast, and the Moai now face a danger bigger than anything they've endured before. Researchers built a super detailed digital model, a digital twin of a bay on the island's southeast coast. They ran a bunch of simulations to see how different sea level rise scenarios would change the way waves move through the bay. The results of these simulations showed that waves could start reaching the site's 15 Moai by 2080, and then of the most recognizable and photographed statues on the island could end up flooded. This spot sits on a big ceremonial platform and draws more visitors than almost any other Moai spot on Rapa Nui. And the danger doesn't stop there. Dozens of other important cultural features nearby are also in danger. Ancient dwellings, petroglyphs carved into stone, burial sites, old rock gardens. Basically the entire physical memory of Rapa Nui's cultural history. If the island doesn't manage these risks, it could even lose its UNESCO World Heritage status. Now that researchers understand the threat more clearly, they want to use this knowledge to help protect the island. Scientists hope to collaborate closely with local communities to safeguard Rapa Nui's cultural heritage for future generations. It started as a routine cleaning to scoop some mud off the coast of Indonesia, but turned into a discovery of remnants of a lost, submerged, Ice Age landmass. Archaeologists found more than 6,000 fossil fragments, and among them, 140,000-year-old Homo erectus remains. This find made scientists rethink how early humans lived, moved, and interacted in Southeast Asia. For years, they thought that Homo erectus on Java Island lived in isolation, separated from the rest of the world. But these dredged fossils blew that story apart. It turns out Java wasn't an island at all back then, but part of a landmass called Sundaland. So, Southeast Asia stretched out like someone had drained the ocean, connecting Indonesia, Malaysia, Borneo, Thailand, and Vietnam into one gigantic landscape. Today's islands of Java, Sumatra, Borneo, and Bali were connected by river systems that probably looked like the Amazon, by forests where giant animals roamed, and by coastal plains that would later sink beneath the ocean when temperatures went up. And Homo erectus were not stuck. They were thriving in what honestly sounds like prehistoric bliss. Yep, it was nothing like we normally imagine Ice Age, a sort of frozen wasteland. Sea levels dropped more than 400 feet because so much water froze into glaciers. When all that water got locked up in ice, whole sections of the ocean floor popped out of the water like stepping stones. Suddenly, early humans didn't need boats. They could literally walk from what's now mainland Southeast Asia all the way to places that are islands today. They could do it while exploring and chasing herds across open land. It was sort of like a giant prehistoric highway system. That giant highway matters because it completely rewrites how early humans moved around. Instead of being trapped, Homo erectus had a whole continent to roam. They followed rivers, crossed valleys, and adapted to different environments the same way you learn shortcuts to the office or find new routes to your favorite coffee shop. And because everything was connected, animals wandered freely too. Tigers, elephants, supersized cows, and turtles the size of small cars. People followed these big animals. This among the fossils pulled from the Madura Strait, such as cut-marked turtle shells and cracked open bovid bones. When you see precise cut marks on bone, it means someone was deliberately carving meat off the bone with tools they made themselves. And cracked bones mean they were taking out marrow, which was like prehistoric energy gel, rich, fatty, and perfect when you need calories to survive. That's a level of planning and skill scientists didn't expect from Homo erectus. It pushes Homo erectus closer to species like early Homo sapiens and Denisovans when it comes to behavior. It means they weren't just surviving on scraps, they were actively pursuing animals, processing, and maybe even sharing food the same way later humans did. So if you imagine them as slow, hunched cavemen, forget that. These people were sharp. The techniques they used to process food look eerily similar to those used by other hominins. Not just Homo erectus. We're talking Homo floresiensis, Denisovans, and early Homo sapiens. That opens the door to the possibility that these groups didn't just exist side by side. They might have interacted. Maybe they traded ideas and copied techniques. Or maybe they even interbred or shared territories. All this makes Southeast Asia look not like a series of isolated islands, but like a buzzing human ecosystem, a place where different human species crossed paths. And here's the heartbreaking part. Everything we know about this place, everything humans built, lost, and discovered there is all underwater now. When the Ice Age ended, glaciers melted like forgotten ice cream cones on a hot sidewalk. Sea levels rose. Slowly, then quickly, rivers flooded, coastlines vanished. Entire human landscapes disappeared beneath the waves. Sundaland drowned over thousands of years, and the people who lived there either adapted or moved to higher ground. Archaeologists now try to interpret what these people did, how they lived, and how many human species walked that land. Every time they pull together bone or artifact from the seabed, we get one step closer to rewriting everything we thought we knew about early human migration. And the new discovery could mean that Southeast Asia may have been just as important to human evolution as Africa, the Middle East, or Europe. Looks like Sundaland wasn't a side quest, but a real mixing zone. A place where humanity experimented, adapted, learned, and evolved. Unexpected finds like this one in Indonesia keep popping up around the world and surprising scientists. Farmers in China were hoping to scoop up bat droppings for natural fertilizers inside a narrow limestone cave. But instead, they spotted pieces of fossilized bone that looked suspiciously like parts of a human skull. This skull turned out to be ridiculously old, around 300,000 years old. Scientists eventually named the fossil Maba 1. The discovery happened way back in 1958, but ever since then, nobody could agree on which ancient human species this skull belonged to. During the late Middle Pleistocene, the world was basically a crowded highway of different ancient human species wandering around. Or just maybe, Maba 1 came from a species we've never met before. The big issue was that researchers only found part of the skull, no jaw, no other bones. So it was like trying to solve a giant puzzle with half the pieces missing. For ages, scientists guessed it might be Neanderthal. But now they've used micro-CT scanning, which is like an X-ray superpower that lets you peek inside fossils without breaking them. That's when they noticed weird tube-like structures connecting parts of the brain case, something Neanderthals basically never had. The inside shape of the skull looked way more like Homo erectus, a much older human species. But even that wasn't a perfect match. The skull's size and shape were closer to modern humans and Neanderthals, and it showed traits Homo erectus usually didn't have. For example, it had a shorter forehead area and a thickened bregma, the meeting point between two skull bones. Maba 1 also had a strange dent on the forehead, almost like a bruise frozen in time. Whatever caused it, maybe a fall, maybe anemia, it happened while the person was alive. But there was no sign of infection, so that individual probably healed and kept living after whatever hit them. So Maba 1 doesn't match any known species perfectly, but it shares features with several and has a similar mystery fossil vibe as others found across Africa. In 1976, a famous paleontologist and her team found another human-like skull in Tanzania. That skull had features that looked surprisingly similar to Homo sapiens, even though it was unbelievably old. Scientists think it may be one of the earliest examples of our species ever discovered. That means this skull could help solve one of science's biggest questions. When exactly did Homo sapiens first show up? The sediment layer where that skull was found goes all the way back to the Middle Pleistocene. That's way earlier than what old textbooks used to claim about when modern humans appeared. And then there's the skull that turned up in Zambia's Broken Hill ore mine. Miners literally stumbled on it, plus a few other bones, completely by accident. Scientists started calling it Rhodesian Man, and at first, everyone thought it might be the big missing link between Homo erectus and Homo sapiens. But with newer research tools and better dating methods, they discovered it's around 299,000 years old and probably belonged to someone from the species Homo heidelbergensis. Every new fossil acts like a missing puzzle piece on the giant chaotic story of human evolution. Each one helps scientists connect species that once seemed unrelated, redraw family trees, and rewrite chapters of our past we didn't even know were wrong.
Back in 1912, British newspapers were buzzing with one bold claim: the first humans appeared in Britain, not Africa. It felt like history itself had been rewritten, and everyone bought into it. Crowds cheered, scientists raised their glasses, and the tiny village of Piltdown in Sussex suddenly became the spotlight for what was hailed as the greatest evolutionary discovery ever. It all happened thanks to this guy, Charles Dawson, a curious amateur archaeologist who was dreaming of making a name in science. He claimed he had found bone fragments of a transitional creature between apes and humans. Dawson teamed up with Arthur Smith Woodward, a respected geologist from the Natural History Museum, and together they assembled fragments of skulls, teeth, and even primitive tools. They unveiled their find, the Piltdown Man, to the Geological Society, and for decades everyone believed it. Textbooks even rewrote human evolution around it, and entire generations memorized it as pure truth. But here's the twist. In 1949, new technology to determine the precise age of objects came along, and things just didn't add up. Tests showed that the skull was only about 50,000 years old, not hundreds of thousands. Then came an even bigger shock. The skull and jaw didn't even belong to the same species. Someone had combined a human skull with the jaw of an ape, probably an orangutan. And even worse, they filed down the teeth to make them look more human and stained the bones to match the surrounding gravel. A Frankenstein fossil and its creator managed to trick the entire world into believing they'd found a missing piece of humanity's puzzle. So Dawson went down in scientific history, but probably not the way he was hoping to. And he wasn't the only one. Some did it for money, others for fame. In the late 19th century Paris, museums were collecting ancient treasures like they were trading cards. When a stunning gold tiara, supposedly belonging to an ancient Scythian king, Ctesiphon, appeared on the market, the Louvre had to have it. It was breathtaking, detailed, majestic, fit for a ruler. The museum proudly paid a fortune and displayed it as a masterpiece of ancient craftsmanship. Then came the heartbreak. A few years later, an entrepreneurial goldsmith from Odessa read about the Louvre's glorious find and burst out laughing. He recognized the tiara because he made it with his own hands. It was a modern piece, a commission he created for local dealers, except they never told him they planned to pass it off as an ancient treasure. The Louvre was humiliated. Once again, the whole world believed in a beautiful lie, and the goldsmith who had just made the museum look ridiculous ended up famous in the world of art. The tiara still holds the Guinness World Record for the greatest goldsmith fraud of all time. Another story of a well-planned scientific hoax takes us to a quiet town of Cardiff, New York, a couple of decades before the Louvre incident. In 1869, workers digging a well struck something hard and enormous. They uncovered what looked like a petrified 10-foot-tall man lying in the earth. Crowds poured in from miles around to see it. Preachers called it proof of the biblical giants mentioned in Genesis. Scientists debated whether it was fossilized or divine. Within days, the Cardiff giant became a sensation. People paid good money to see it, 50 cents a ticket, which was a lot back then. Later, it turned out that a man named George Hull carved the mysterious giant from gypsum after an argument with a Methodist reverend. Hull just wanted to prove how easily you can fool people, especially religious believers, unlike himself. So he buried the fake giant, and it worked too well. Even after experts exposed the hoax, visitors didn't care. They kept coming because they wanted to believe. Over time, the giant changed ownership several times. You can now see it at the Fenimore Farm and Country Village Museum in Cooperstown, New York. Well, speaking of museums, you might have seen crystal skulls that glow under light, presented as sacred artifacts from Mesoamerican temples. Yes, that skull from an Indiana Jones movie with ancient Aztec powers or even extraterrestrial energy. So, museums displayed such skulls proudly until scientists at the British Museum and the Smithsonian decided to give them a closer look. And what they found shattered the myth. They found that the skulls were made with modern rotary tools and abrasives that ancient carvers didn't have. In other words, someone in the 1800s or 1900s made them using modern machinery and fooled the world. They weren't messages from deities or some advanced creatures from space, just very fancy paperweights that tricked so many people into believing in some ancient superpowers. Well, let's jump several decades closer to the present day, shall we? In the 1960s, Yale University revealed what looked like a discovery that could rewrite world history: a 15th century map showing North America labeled Vinland. It meant Vikings had mapped America long before Columbus. The headlines were sensational. The idea was romantic. Explorers crossing icy seas century before Europe even knew America existed. But something just didn't add up. The parchment was generally medieval, but the ink wasn't. Decades of testing revealed it contained titanium dioxide, a pigment invented in the 20th century. In 2021, Yale confirmed it. The Vinland map was a modern forgery, drawn over old parchment to make it look ancient. It wasn't proof of Viking genius, but rather of human cleverness on one side and the tendency to be easily persuaded on the other. And when we speak of persuasion, you don't have to try too hard when a really trustworthy source like National Geographic shares something, right? Well, in 1999, it presented what it thought was the ultimate discovery: a fossil that bridged the gap between dinosaurs and birds. It was called Archaeoraptor, and it was going to change everything we knew about evolution. The fossil came from China, and on first glance, it was perfect. A dinosaur tail, bird-like wings, and bones that seemed to tell the story of flight's evolution. But soon, paleontologists started whispering. The bones didn't quite line up. CT scans revealed the ugly truth. It was literally glued together from parts of different species. A dinosaur tail from one fossil, a bird body from another. Someone had Frankensteined the fossils to make a more valuable specimen. The embarrassment hit hard, especially for National Geographic, which had built an entire story around a fake the world liked to believe. Now, if you think scientific hoaxes are all in the past because of all the 20th century high-tech, here's a surprise for you. In 2020, the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. made a stunning confession. All 16 fragments of its prized Dead Sea Scroll collection were modern forgeries. They'd spent millions acquiring what they thought were sacred 2,000-year-old texts, only to learn they were made of ancient leather painted with modern ink. The forgery was so advanced that even experts were fooled at first. But after detailed forensic tests, it became clear the holy relics were anything but holy. It wasn't just about money, it was about faith. Thousands of visitors had stood in front of those glass cases, feeling awe, reverence, and connection, only to learn it was a show built on lies. And finally, it's time for one of the eeriest hoaxes of all. In 2000, a mummy surfaced in Pakistan, claiming to be a 26-year-old Persian princess, the daughter of Xerxes. They found her in a gilded sarcophagus, wrapped in golden robes. Her face was eerily well preserved. Archaeologists were stunned, but something about her looked wrong. CT scans, linguistic analysis, and radiocarbon dating revealed the horrifying truth. The mummy wasn't ancient at all. She was a modern woman, and someone likely took her life and then mummified her to sell as a fake relic. Well, yikes. The story went from exciting to tragic overnight and broke many hearts. What was supposed to be a royal miracle turned out to be a human crime and yet another lie. All these stories have one thing in common: hope. People want to believe. They want to touch the past, to find proof that connects them to something bigger. Whether it's scientists looking for the missing link, museums wanting fame, or believers searching for signs of faith, we all crave wonder. History is full of tricksters, and sometimes the best stories come from the fakes that fooled us all.
Archaeologists were looking for the long-lost tomb of Cleopatra when they found something that seemed too good to be real. Roughly 43 feet underground beneath a ruined Egyptian temple, there was a perfectly straight tunnel, carved through solid sandstone. The tunnel is over 4,200 feet long, and so precise that experts called it a geometric miracle. The tunnel sits beneath an ancient city west of Alexandria, near Egypt's Mediterranean coast. The team that found it carefully peeled back layers of stone and debris until they hit this passage, about 6.5 feet tall, cut cleanly into bedrock. There were no collapse marks or wandering curves, just precision. If you've ever tried to drill a straight hole into a wall at home and failed within seconds, imagine doing this underground for nearly a mile. Ancient builders had no GPS, no lasers, no modern surveying tools. Yet, this tunnel stays remarkably level over its entire length. That means they understood gradients, angles, and distance in a way that goes far beyond stack stones and hope. Engineers today rely on machines to maintain that kind of accuracy underground. These people relied on knowledge, repetition, and patience. Parts of the tunnel now sit underwater or collapsed, probably after several earthquakes that struck the region centuries ago. Some experts think the tunnel may have once connected the temple to water sources or ritual areas closer to the sea. Archaeologists noticed that the Egyptian tunnel is an exact replica of the Eupalinos tunnel in Greece. It's believed to be one of the most important engineering achievements of antiquity, which only makes the Egyptian tunnel more special. Underground passages in ancient Greece linked temples to sacred springs. Back in ancient times, people moved through space in specific ways, underground and above, to reenact myths and journeys of gods. A tunnel like this could represent a path to the underworld, rebirth, or divine transition. Nobody would invest this much effort in construction just for decoration. Plus, in earlier digs at the site, archaeologists pulled up all kinds of artifacts, including coins with the names and faces of Cleopatra VII and Alexander the Great. They also found figurines, statues of deities, a mummy with a gold tongue, and even an entire cemetery packed with Greco-Roman style mummies. The perfect geometric tunnel isn't an isolated flex. Not far away, underwater archaeologists off the coast of Alexandria uncovered something that sounds like it belongs in a royal travel documentary. A 2,000-year-old pleasure boat that once glided along the Nile. And this wasn't just another fishing vessel or cargo barge. It likely stretched over 115 feet long and 23 feet wide, and had a decorated cabin, plus around 20 rowers, which turned the river into a moving palace. This isn't speculation pulled out of thin air. An ancient Greek geographer named Strabo wrote about these exact boats around the 1st century BCE. He described lavish vessels used by royalty during festivals and ceremonial outings in Alexandria. For years, historians treated that as a poetic exaggeration. Then, this wreck surfaced, and suddenly, Strabo sounded less like a storyteller and more like a witness. Even ancient art backs it up. The Palestrina mosaic from Italy shows richly decorated boats floating down the Nile. They match both the texts and the physical evidence almost perfectly. Inside the wreck, archaeologists found something small but incredibly human. graffiti scratched into the wood in Greek. Just writing left behind by someone who stood on that deck 2,000 years ago. Researchers haven't fully decoded the text yet, but its existence alone matters. It tells us this wasn't just a floating symbol of power. People lived on it. It was sort of like a modern luxurious yacht, and the Nile was like a highway. All types of vessels with passengers were moving back and forth, visiting friends, carrying their goods for trade, doing business, and, of course, going on pleasure cruises. The location of the pleasure boat makes the story even better. The boat sat near the temple of Isis on Antirodos, an island that once hosted royal and religious buildings before earthquakes and rising seas erased it from the surface. That temple collapsed around 50 CE, and researchers believe the boat may have sunk during the same disaster. Another recent find that has to do with life on the Nile is the lower part of the massive worship complex about 10 miles southwest of Cairo. It connects directly to an upper temple dedicated to Ra, the Egyptian deity of the sun. The newly excavated part is a 4,500-year-old valley temple. The upper temple sits on higher ground, and archaeologists excavated it years ago. The valley temple is closer to the Nile, and it's connected to the upper part by a causeway. A German Egyptologist actually started excavating part of the temple back in 1901, but the groundwater sat much higher then, and he had to stop. Now, the groundwater level is lower, and a modern team has managed to excavate about half of the Valley Temple since 2024. Once they got in, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a columned entrance portico. Then they found blocks carved with a calendar of religious events, almost like an ancient public schedule. The text includes feasts for Sokar, a falcon-headed deity linked to Memphis, which was a major capital during the Old Kingdom, plus the festival of Min, a fertility deity, and even the procession of Ra. The calendar blocks all showed up around the entrance portico area, which most definitely means that the outside facade of the temple displayed this long feast calendar publicly. That's why archaeologists think this might be one of the earliest examples of a true public calendar ever found. A literal event list for an entire community, built into the architecture. On top of that, the team found dozens of decorated blocks covered in inscriptions that named a pharaoh who ruled around 2420 to 2389 BCE and had the temple built. This temple shows how people moved through ancient Egypt. Because the upper temple handled the main worship, but the valley temple made the whole place accessible. It acted like the landing area for boats coming in, either directly from the Nile or more likely from one of its side channels. So instead of hiking across desert terrain, visitors could arrive by water, step onto the temple's landing stage, enter through the Valley Temple, then head up the causeway ramp toward the upper temple on the hill. After about a century of use, researchers found that the Valley Temple had been repurposed into a residential area. And the best part is, what they found from that era: 2 wooden pieces used for playing Senet, an ancient board game. Senet shows up at other Egyptian sites too, including King Tutankhamun's tomb, but nobody fully agrees on the rules today. Some discoveries in Egypt create new mysteries instead of solving the old ones. Earlier in 2025, archaeologists announced the discovery of the first pharaoh's burial found in or near the Valley of Kings since King Tut's tomb in 1922. The newly found tomb of Thutmose II flooded almost immediately after burial. Ancient officials rushed in, removed the mummy and most of the grave goods, and hid them somewhere else. The weirdest part is that an alabaster ointment jar inside the tomb links the burial directly to Hatshepsut, Thutmose II's wife and half-sister. The inscription basically says she made this monument for him, which proves she arranged his burial. But it still doesn't explain why she placed him here and later chose the Valley of the Kings for herself. Now, archaeologists are studying a huge mound of rubble near the tomb, about 75 feet tall, and suspect it was built to hide something important. If a second tomb sits underneath, it could be complete and undisturbed. So, the deeper the archaeologists dig, the more ancient Egypt stops feeling like a gone civilization and starts feeling like a paused one. Looks like it didn't just survive time, it outsmarted it. And we're only just beginning to catch up.
The lost city of Atlantis may have actually been found. No, really. Two researchers were working in the waters off the coast of Cuba when they discovered the ruins of what looked like an ancient submerged city. That happened about 20 years ago, and yet no one really talks about it today. It's like the authorities just took the research, locked it away in some top-secret room, and decided no one else should know about it. But why? Well, I'm going to tell you. Back in 2001, Paulina Zalitsky, a marine engineer, and her husband, Paul Weinswig, were hired to explore the waters off Cuba's western coast. They had two main objectives: to search for old shipwrecks, possibly hiding treasures like gold and jewels, and to locate valuable oil and natural gas deposits deep underwater. They were using a sonar. Basically, this equipment is like a sound-based radar. It sends out sound waves underwater, and when those waves hit something, like a sunken ship, they bounce back. The system can figure out where and how far the object is just by listening to the echo. So, the couple was scanning the seafloor with this equipment more than 2,000 feet below the surface. And then, out of nowhere, they found something way more interesting than gold or oil. They found stones. Not just any stones. I'm talking huge, perfectly arranged stones. Kind of like a mini version of the pyramid at Chichen Itza, or even better, like a bunch of tiny submerged Chichen Itzas. Yep, they saw that, or at least they think they did. The thing is, sonar doesn't work like a camera. It definitely doesn't record video or take actual pictures underwater. What it does do is create images using sound. And those images are usually just outlines or shapes, kind of like a blurry black and white sketch. It shows you where things are, but not exactly what they look like. And that's exactly what happened back then. The equipment started producing images of these perfectly organized stone structures, and it really looked like some kind of urban development. I mean, the site was just too organized, too symmetrical to be just random rocks. But it sounded too good to be true. I mean, this discovery could totally change everything we know about ancient civilizations on the American continent. So the scientists decided it would be too irresponsible to announce anything without finding more evidence first. And that's why they decided to go back to that same spot. This time they sent down an underwater remotely operated vehicle to actually see what was going on beneath the sea. See? This robot was basically an underwater cameraman. And yep, it confirmed it. There was definitely something strange down there. It looked like an ancient city made of huge, smooth blocks of granite. These rocks were about 8 feet by 10 feet. Some were in pyramid shapes, others were circular. Some seemed to be deliberately cut and then stacked on top of each other, while others appeared isolated from the rest. Together, they looked like they were forming corridors and outlines of rooms. It was like finding large buildings in the middle of an underwater desert. These images were enough for Zalitsky to seal the deal. Back then, she confirmed that this amazing structure, her words, could have been a large urban center. Again, her words. Then the couple started to speculate. They said that these structures were probably built more than 6,000 years ago, which would make them older than the Great Pyramids of Egypt. It's even older than the famous Maya, the civilization that used to live in the Americas and is known for their ancient and advanced temples. The research also suggested that these structures might belong to a civilization that lived on the American continent thousands of years ago, and that we didn't even know about. This supposed civilization once thrived on a 100-mile land bridge connecting Cuba to Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. But then, something catastrophic happened. According to their theory, the Earth's faults shifted beneath the surface, leading to a massive earthquake. Then, in the blink of an eye, the entire bridge was destroyed. The land was swallowed up by the sea and ended up at the bottom of the ocean, and this civilization disappeared. Of course, all the connections to the famous Atlantis myth got the media totally hooked on the story. News websites ran headlines like "Lost City of the Caribbean Found" and "Atlantis Found in Cuba." So, could that really be Atlantis? I mean, did they finally find the remains of this supposedly super advanced and lost civilization? Well, it's hard to say. From the start, part of the scientific community wasn't buying into the story too much. First, there's the issue of the date. Saying that this civilization existed at this spot at least 6,000 years ago just wasn't very credible. Then some European archaeologists argued that the stones they found using sonar might just be natural limestone, not perfectly sculpted granite. And third, it was too deep. Even with the whole theory of earth faults opening up and swallowing everything, it's still hard to explain how an entire city ended up so deep in the ocean. For comparison, there is Heraklion, a real ancient Egyptian port city that got submerged. Today, it is only about 19 feet underwater. But this so-called Atlantis city is at depths between 2,000 and 2,460 feet. See how that's totally different, right? People think it would have taken around 50,000 years for such stone structures to sink to the depth where they are said to be found. And according to experts, none of the known civilizations from that long ago had the ability to build such structures. But for Zalitsky, yes, it was possible. She still believed in the fault theory to explain how this land ended up at the bottom of the ocean so fast. Big movements of the Earth's tectonic plates are usually followed by things like volcanoes and earthquakes. So, according to her, it's a powerful event, and the island sinking could have happened really quickly. This earthquake theory could also explain why some of the megaliths on the seafloor look organized while others don't. But to really prove any of this, they needed a specially designed robot to go down there again and take samples of the rocks and sediment. That way, they could figure out how old the rocks were and maybe even find signs of human life, like carvings, sculptures, or artifacts. The problem is, drilling into those structures isn't easy. They look like granite, and drilling granite that deep underwater is seriously tough. And more than anything, they needed money to do it, a lot of it. So maybe they just never got the funding. Because even with all that initial hype, no further explorations or studies were ever reported. And that lack of follow-up sparked a lot of speculation. Some people even wondered if the story got shut down on purpose, like maybe the authorities wanted to keep something top secret. As if this underwater city was built by some kind of higher extraterrestrial being, and they just don't want us to find out. But truth be told, the strongest argument for saying, yeah, that is definitely a lost city, is that nature supposedly couldn't have built something so symmetrical. Geologists did try to find natural explanations, or at least similar examples from other parts of the world, but they came up short. Still, just because we haven't found a clear natural explanation doesn't mean there isn't one. Nature can create some pretty wild and unexpected stuff, so honestly, that whole too perfect to be natural angle is kind of a weak argument. What most likely happened is that experts just weren't convinced it was actually a sunken city, and that's probably why no one followed up on their work. Over time, the buzz faded, the story disappeared, and the site slipped back into silence. And without more data, the true nature of those underwater formations off Cuba's coast is still